The views and opinions expressed by the participants of this show are those of the individuals who express them, and are not necessarily associated with the guests or sponsors of the show. Listener discretion is recommended. You're listening to Evangelion and Good Friends, a production of AvaMonkey, covering the many facets of Evangelion and its surrounding fandom. In this episode, we're taking a critical look at Evangelion 3.0+1.0, Thrice Upon a Time, which is now available globally on Amazon Prime Video. Enjoy the show. Alright everybody, so welcome to the Evangelion 3.0+1.0 Spoilercast. AvaMonkey here, and today I am joined by a few of my friends and counterparts in the fandom, and we're going to kind of go around and just do some quick introductions. So we're going to go with we're going to start with tenure here. Let's start with Brendan, aka Ava Otaku. Why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself and your history briefly?
Hi everybody. I used to run a website called the Evangelion Otaku page at avaotaku.com. Technically it's still up, the rent's paid, but nobody lives there anymore. So, but yeah, I got into Ava in probably 1996 and kind of took a break after the movie, the end of Evangelion came out, and then sort of got interested in Rebuild, kind of 2 movies deep was when I got interested in revisiting the Evangelion world through the Rebuild films.
Yeah, so I kind of dug you up and we're like, hey, let's get somebody old school to get
temporarily out of retirement.
Yeah, and moving along, we also have somebody I've had a couple times before, Mr. Mikel, aka GoatJesus.
Hi. Yeah, so I run a YouTube channel called GoatJesus, which I've been too busy to actually post or keep it updated whatsoever. I currently work as a writer for an independent game studio, and I do various things like illustrations and comics and filmmaking. I try to make short films on my own time. Recent graduate from USC for film production, and yeah, my background is mainly in film and television, directing and writing, and it's always great to be doing work with you, AvaMonkey.
Always appreciated to have you around. Last but not least, we have Chester, aka AnnoCinema. Tell us a little bit about what you do.
Hi guys, Chester here. I run AnnoCinema, mostly known for my AnnoCinema on Instagram, where my tagline is reverse engineering filmmaking by analyzing the works of Hideaki Anno. So not just Ava, Anno works all across the board, from Karakano to Nadia to Shin Godzilla. I kind of actually got inspired to enter filmmaking via Anno's Karakano. So not Evangelion, but Karakana was the thing that got me into filmmaking. But yeah, now I'm in Japan, kind of freelancing filmmaking on the side. That's pretty much it.
Also, Karakano is excellent, and it's like up there in my like top 2 anime or something. It's in my top anime, top 5. Yeah.
So today we're here to talk about 3.0+1.0. Basically assembled my my Ava Dream team. You know, we all have some degree of formal filmmaking background, and that's kind of the approach that we're going to have here. You know, this is my 3rd podcast about this specific film. You know, we did our Evangelion Eve, which is all about our hopes and dreams for the film, and then Chester, we had you along with my friend Wa. We were talking about the film as it had just come out, but the film is now out in English, and we've had some time to see the final product, see it in English, digest it. Chester, you've probably had the most time to digest it.
Mm-hmm.
I look forward to talk with all of you guys. So, how did you feel about the Rebuild films as a whole prior to the film? And having seen it, have your feelings changed about the Rebuilds as a whole? And broadly speaking, how did you feel about the film?
I think we did touch about it on the previous podcast, but my feelings on the Rebuild films were I didn't really care too much about them. I felt like they were secondary to the original series, the NGE series of the 90s. Sometimes I would watch it just because it's the idea of this is Anno in the 21st century. This is the latest version of Anno and not an older version of Anno. But, I always enjoyed NGE more, and Rebuilds were just, if for some whatever reason you wanted to watch a movie in 16:9 instead of 4:3, then maybe you would turn it on, but really didn't give it much thought. Everyone was haranguing me about, oh, do you have any information about when 4.0 would come out? And I really didn't care. At that point, I almost was like, I could die and not watch 4.0, and it wouldn't matter a lot to me. But now that 4.0 came out, I enjoyed I'm just going to call it 4.0 just because it's easier to say. But Yeah, I enjoy the rebuilds a lot more, especially because spoiler alert, it's unnecessary at this point. But it ties in NGE and that kind of thing. I feel good about 4.0, and I love it.
GoatJesus, your feelings about the Reba films as a whole prior to and now that you've seen it, your feelings about the film.
So I got into Evangelion when I was 14 years old, back in 2009, and I watched Neon Genesis and EOE, and that blew me away, and I jumped straight into Rebuilds, which 2.0 was out at the time, and I very much, very much enjoyed 2.0, but as the years went on, I sort of soured on that particular film. I thought of it as kind of this hackney, sort of fan servicey, sort of movie that was very antithetical to what I enjoyed about Neon Genesis and EOE over time. 3.0 came out. I really disliked that movie, and I was not a fan, and the reverse happened where I warmed up to it over time because it was interesting. It was like something that was very unique that no big budget franchise had ever sort of done, which is just like wipe the slate, sort of working against what the previous film had done entirely. And it feels very ambitious and surreal. It's not very well executed, and I never really thought that it was well executed, but it was at least an interesting idea. Maybe from a meta perspective, it would work with the next film. Having seen this film, it has cast a dark shadow over the entirety of the rebuilds for me. I think that they are abysmal from a narrative, character, pacing, structure, thematic, like just everything. I don't think I have a single positive thing to say about them as a whole and how they function with each other. So I'm probably going to be the most negative person here as far as my feelings about the rebuilds itself and this final film and how it kind of reflects on the rest of them. But yeah, I think there are some things here and there to still appreciate about them. I shouldn't like make a blanket statement like it's just all terrible. I'm definitely not in positive headspace about them these days.
And Brennan, what about you?
I remember being excited when the first film was announced and when that trailer first arrived and seeing the kind of big budget version of the first 6 episodes. But when I actually saw the film finally, I thought, this is really boring. The pacing of that first film is just terrible. It's so fast. So I kind of got lost interest after the first film came out, but then slowly got more warmed up to them over the course of each film. I actually thought the third film was the best film of all 4 of them. I thought the pacing of that film was really well done. It's the only one that feels like a real movie. It takes its time in the right places and it moves well in the right places. Ultimately, I did like this final film. I thought that in terms of looking at the rebuild films, this was the best ending that could come out of it. But that's in the context of the rebuild films, I guess is how I view it, where I think this is a very appropriate ending to the series, to the rebuild series. I don't know how I feel if I feel that way about Evangelion as a whole. So I liked the ending of this rebuild series a lot. I don't know if I like it if I have to apply that to the entire Evangelion saga, though.
Mm-hmm.
For my part, I have been following these films for the past 15 years? 15 years, yes. And because that original plan was 3 re-edits and then a new ending in 2008, that was what I was anticipating. That was what I was wanting. I like 1.0 and 2.0, flawed as they may be. The second half of 1.0 is my favorite part of the entire, 4-film franchise. My feelings and my dislike for 3.0 has been well documented over the years. I really do not like 3.0, just in how it's structured and directed and how the story and the characterization is done. And I had a lot of hope on this, this final film. I still think that Rebuild overall is, the original NG is much, much better. Just overall, it's a classic that's going to stand the test of time. I am glad that these films exist. They have been extremely important in maintaining and keeping the franchise active, alive, and vibrant. I'm glad they exist. For people that, love all of them and have really positive emotional experiences with them, like, I'm all for it. I don't want to tear anybody down, but the first 2, I like. The second 2, I don't. And I generally felt very underwhelmed by the last film, and I really wanted to like it, and I'm trying very much to like it, but it's hard, and I'm feeling a little down on it, to be candid.
I think Final is a very modern anime film. I think it actually reminded me a lot of Your Name. In the end, I was kind of thinking feels very contemporary, whereas the end of Evangelion is kind of timeless, and it's so subversive in every way that it's like there was no chance that this film could ever get to that level.
Yeah, and that's one of the things that I'm pragmatic about, because just the way that they have been structured over time, I feel like ultimately that movie was never going to satisfy everybody in terms of like fans of the original series, fans of the new series. It was a pretty tall order, especially when it's kind of apparent that Anno probably didn't want to make it at the time that it was made. It was made kind of out of obligation. But Brendan, I will kind of agree with what you said, that I feel like it probably is optimal to some degree, but I do still think it's too little, too late, at least for me.
Mm.
Let's move into just sort of kind of recapping the film and its structure. Overall, it's got a 2-hour, 34-minute runtime. About 14 minutes of that is recap and titles, which means that the actual film itself is 2 hours and 22 minutes, which is pretty long for an anime film. And I know that the film itself is supposed to be written in 4 parts, and I've tried my best to kind of guesstimate what those 4 parts are, at a script level, because there's some very obvious breaks in the structure of the film. Part 1, I think, is about a 15-minute part, which has the Paris operation, the titles, and the rescue. Part 2 is about 39 minutes, and that's the entire village sequence. And then part 3, which is like the big part, which is almost like a non-stop kind of thing, is about 1 hour and 7 minutes. You've got that section with Vile and Nerv in preparation, the Operation Yamato and the airship battle, and then you've got the Ava dive, and then sort of the section where there's like a lot of lore babble, the ritual, and journeying into the anti-universe. And then part 4, which is about 23 minutes, is instrumentality, heavily focused on Gendo. And then another sequence where, we go through with Shinji, with Asuka, Kaoru, Rei, Neon Genesis, and the reality rewrite, followed by credits. So, we start in Paris, and Paris is basically all about going to get parts and supplies for the final operation. That's pretty much all that sequence is all about. And they're trying to get parts for the Avas to be overlapping compliant, which is the implication there being that overlapping compliant allows them to enter into the anti-universe. And then we have our titles. Our characters get rescued by Kensuke. And then we are in the village for a bit. Shinji doesn't do very much until about a half hour in. You get a lot of characterization with Rei Q, who basically, dissolves into LCL, and Shinji basically comes to the realization that he wants to go to Vile and do something. We spend some time on the airship. The whole point of the Yamato operation is to go and destroy or incapacitate Unit 13. We have an airship battle with the 3 other ships. The Avas dive. They try to get down there to Unit 13. Asuka tries to destroy or incapacitate Unit 13 with her deactivation entry plug type thing, but her own AT field prevents her from doing so. And then she tries to merge with the Angel to break through her AT field to defeat Unit 13. But basically we find out that Gendo has basically tricked them all into coming there to get the airship, to get Unit 1, and to get the Angel that's inside of Asuka to start the ritual. They convert the Black Moon into a pair of lances to go into the anti-universe, and then he takes the 2 lances to find the imaginary Evangelion, which is kind of like Lilith, to recreate Lilith, to initiate instrumentality, and then Vile uses the spinal column of the Wunder to create a new lance so that Shinji with Unit 8 can go into the anti-universe, and Shinji confronts his father. We have Gendo's instrumentality, we learn about him, and then Shinji uses the final lance to get rid of all the Evangelions, rewrite humanity, or rewrite the universe, time, space, whatever, to create a new world without Evangelions. And I think that's generally most of the main beats of the story.
Sounds about right.
Did I miss anything really important in there?
No?
Yeah, I just watched it. That sounds like what I just saw.
Yeah.
I watched it
Sounds about right.
three times and dug into.
I've only watched it twice.
Oh my god, I watched it 3 times and I dug into some wikis. People did ask like, "Hey, explain what happened in this movie." I did not get any of that the first time I watched it. At least the second half of the film really kind of punches you in the face with a lot of stuff.
Yeah.
Moving from there, let's talk about story, writing, and structure, and specifically in terms of pacing. Michael, how did you feel about the structure and the pacing? And did it feel to you like a 2.5 hour film?
Yeah, I felt that. I felt the length for sure. I actually really enjoy the first half of this movie for the most part. The opening is an exception. I think the opening is overall like frivolous and pointless, and having an action scene hook to begin the last 3 films in a row is sort of like very weak. Like you're here in a film and you're just sitting down and you're watching a movie ideally, and you've committed to it, and you don't really need to open up with a grand spectacle of some kind. So I felt like that was a poor use of time and pacing, and we didn't know the stakes there, really, like what was going on in the opening. So I think the opening is a failure for the first 14 minutes. But then we get to the Ghibli Village, and I really like how things, it still has that Anno brisk cutting and everything like that, but the pacing itself is kind of slower, and we're given time with the characters. Maybe not enough time, to be honest, if I had to criticize one aspect of it. But then the second half comes in. And the second half is all Wunder and like crazy bombastic stuff is happening, and it feels like a third act set piece for the entire second half of the movie. Like all the shit is hitting the fan. It's almost nonstop action from then on, therefore, and it reminds me quite heavily of the way that the film Space Jam: The New Legacy is structured, where the entire second half of that movie is a basketball game, which is like a third act set piece sort of extended from the midpoint and drawn out for the rest of it. And it's sort of, that's where the movie stops functioning properly for me, is like when we get to that midpoint and then it screeches and it just becomes noisy, like visually noisy. Too much exposition is going on. A lot of terminology is being thrown at you. A lot of nonstop action. It's very disorienting. The continuum of movement of the cutting and the way that the focal point is just jumping between shots is very disorienting. And yeah, that second half is it feels so much longer than the Ghibli part to me because of just the way that everything is constructed from a narrative perspective and from a filmmaking perspective of that second half.
To Michael's point about not starting this film with this bombastic action scene, I completely agree with that, because the opening titles are so strong in this movie. You could have just started with that with Sagisu's music and those images of them walking through the city, and that would have been a great intro, and then go into the village and then go into the action scene. I think that would have been a much more appropriate. It kind of sets the tone for this somber trek through the Destroy Tokyo 3 stuff. I thought was great. But yeah, the Ghibli Village is fun. I thought that all the stuff with Ray Q is very endearing and thoughtful, and her goodbye is very nicely handled. But in terms of the how messy the second half is, these rebuild films have all been filled with excess. I mean, extreme excess to the point of it being kind of ridiculous. Like the Ava 7 series is just kind of, what the hell is happening? Why is this going on? But the precedent for that was set in the second film of just being all out craziness. So while objectively I think it's stupid, in the context of these movies, I kind of just give it a pass, because they've been doing this the whole time of just... Yeah, I mean, like, if you think back to the end of Evangelion and just like the mass production Avas were this big threat, and now you have literally a gazillion Avas flying around. It's such a different tone. It's just madness. But I kind of dug it because of how just incredibly over the top it all ended up being. from a story standpoint, it's messy. I think there's a lot of stuff that it's like self-contradictory, that characters say to each other, and then something happens, and it's sort of like, what? Well, wait a second. You just said that this didn't work this way, and now it's working this way. Like, for example, Aaron, you were talking about the Asuka's Ava 2 being using its AT field to protect Unit 13. And it's like, that doesn't really make any sense because it's scared of Unit 13, so it's protecting it?
Yeah.
That doesn't make any sense. So why would, all you need to do to fix that is say that the Ava's protecting the other Ava, and it's like rebelling against Asuka, and that fixes that entire situation. So there's messy things like that where it's like, why is this so messy? But at the same time, again, I just find these rebuild films to be so ludicrous that I give a lot of that stuff a pass, because it's kind of like you get what, it never tried to be more than that. It always was this big, crazy, bombastic cluster F. So...
To be fair, though, none of the Rebuild films have ever engaged in a non-stop action set piece, because it is one huge chunk. Like, there's two distinct halves of this movie, and none of the Rebuilds have, like, had something that feels equivalent to a third act happen from the halfway to the end. And that's, like, that's what's crazy to me.
The part with Misato and the prep part that kind of segues between, that kind of bridges those two halves. I liked that stuff. I liked the stuff with her talking to Ritsuko about her feelings and kanji and all that stuff. I thought was nice to kind of fill in some gaps, or fill it in enough that you kind of figure out and understand what went on between 2 and 3. But then once they get going, yes, it just turns into a barrage of action. And that's one of those things where this is Anno without the limitations that he should have probably been put under. He just was doing whatever he wanted, No
limiters.
Yeah.
Chester, why don't you jump in? Any thoughts about the structure of the film?
When I first watched the film, I didn't realize there was any sort of conventional structure to it. I thought it was just Anno going crazy. But now that I've watched it a few times, I think there's actually fairly... You can kind of stuff it into a pretty traditional 3-act structure, right? The first act, you have the hook in the beginning with the Paris operation. The first act is the Ghibli village, which is Shinji slowly accepting the call to adventure, right? He's reluctant. He's been refusal of the call the entire time in the village until a certain point happens, and he's like, okay, I will take on this this duty once again. And then you get start of the second act, which is fun and games, and that's him getting on the Wonder, and it's kind of chill for a little bit until the second act, which is Operation Yamato, and that's the second act. And when Yamato fails, that's the Dark Night of the Soul. That's when you think everything has gone to shit and nothing will ever work and we're all doomed. And honestly, when I did watch it in the movie theater, I thought we were doomed. I thought that was... Well, I knew that it was not the end of the movie, but I did feel like this was a pickle they couldn't get themselves out of. So it was a very effective Dark Night of the Soul for me, a very effective end of the second act for me, even though I wasn't thinking about in those terms. And then we have the third act, which is the final attempt to solve this problem that we're facing. And we have the end of Evangelion reoccurrence and reprisal third act, which I thought was very enjoyable, just because from a sort of filmmaking perspective of, I just like all that meta and insanity, even though I don't understand what's going on. But structurally, I think you could fit it into a pretty standard mold. I watch a lot of other Japanese films, and I think they kind of throw that out of the window. And I talk to a lot of Japanese people here, and they're actually not even aware of the concept of a 3-act structure. But I think surprisingly, Anno's works, whether in episodic stuff like Karakano, actually, if you look at the structure of each episode there, or Shin Godzilla, or the latest entry into the Rebuild films, or the last entry of the Rebuild films, they're actually surprisingly 3-act structure based. But yeah, so that's what I think about the structure. I didn't mind the beginning where they had the Paris operation. I thought it was of the Evangelion tradition, and they were sort of amping it up. I felt it was a longer operation than the other sequences, but I haven't timed them or anything. I think it's sort of the reason why they did the Paris operation is because there's that, what some people would call a lull in the Ghibli village thing, and they're like, wow, I signed up for this Ava movie, and they don't even have a fight until an hour into the movie, and they'd be dissatisfied with that. So I think it's sort of a calm down, guys. Okay, we'll give you a fight for those fans who sort of needed that.
Like at 1 hour 13 minutes is actually when the operation goes into action. That's when the Wounder's flying around and doing crazy stuff, and that's like really before the midpoint. We're at action, nonstop action for more than half of the movie, and then when you take out that like opening action sequence and just consider the slowdown with the Ghibli Village part, it's maybe like 40 minutes, 35 minutes in total, which is crazy. I think that's not nowhere near enough character building. One of the biggest issues I had with this movie was the attempt at having a traditional character arc with Shinji Ikari, but the failure to sort of like illustrate it properly. So there's this concept that I've learned in sort of filmmaking where it's one thing to sort of pay lip service to a character growing or developing, and it's another to demonstrate it and show it like properly through the scenes. And with Shinji, he's given a fishing pole and we're barely shown him fishing with Kensuke. We almost have no scenes with him and Kaji Jr. or like developing him with this cast of characters. Almost nothing with Mari before the end, which is a huge blow, I think, just from a traditional narrative perspective. If you remove meta-narrative and the importance of that, Shinji and Mari and them as a relationship that matters to the film's ending, it kind of really fails to sort of build up that properly. And I think this could have benefited from so much time on the Wunder, like 30 minutes more time to develop the characters, and maybe like even 10 more minutes in the Ghibli Village just to give Shinji, or 5 more minutes even, to give him just a little bit more breathing room. Because there's stuff like where he has this PTSD, he has PTSD in this film, and his development and getting over PTSD is sort of like a switch. It just like flips, and then he doesn't have it because he sees Rei explode and doesn't freak out and have a mental breakdown. And I would have at least liked to have seen him struggling with PTSD, conditioning himself to get over it over time, and really like illustrated that, if that makes sense. So the fact that the film is structured the way it is, I think is a huge detriment to its success as a story apart from its meta-narrative that it's trying to tell. Because a lot more time, I think, given the character reset in 3.0 that happened there needed to be a lot more time with some of the characters. I would have liked to have seen like Shinji interacting with Misato, Kaji Jr., a lot of different people. Mari's vital, I think. So just more time with those would have been nice.
I can't defend Shinji's recovery, how abrupt that is, honestly, but the one part of that I did appreciate was them mentioning that he's in the car with Kensuke, and Kensuke says, good things also came out of Near Third Impact. And I thought that was an interesting point that he was making to Shinji in that moment. And I kind of feel like that's where he starts to really change and come to grips with his current situation. So that little line, which again is, falls into the show don't tell faux pas, but it was a nice moment between them that I thought at least they had made an attempt at giving Shinji a motivation to coming to terms with things a little bit and accepting what he'd been a part of.
Mm-hmm.
I felt like Shinji's getting over his PTSD wasn't so much when Rei exploded. I felt it was when Rei visited him while he was at the little white tower thing, and Rei gave him his cassette player and gave him the food, and there was like a little dialogue scene of like, why I'm looking at it right now, and Shinji's like, why are you all so nice to me, and Rei's like, because we like you. I think it was that scene that turned Shinji around. I mean, that was the scene that made him be not a recluse and made him come back to the village and actually talk to Asuka and Kensuke and that kind of thing.
Do you think that its handling of mental illness and PTSD is like true to life in that way? Like, is that something that you would get over, something like PTSD? Say you're a war vet or you've seen violence of some kind. Is that something that would be like a cause and effect in your opinion?
I mean, I don't know anything about PTSD because, but I think narratively that's what they were trying to do. I just mean that it was not when Rei exploded was my point.
I was just saying that it was very noticeable, the switch, that he had PTSD, and then when she exploded, it should trigger him, because it's exactly what he experienced with Kaoru. If anything, I mean, even Gendo is just like, ha ha ha, and he's doing this mustache twirling scene after, where he's like, we've really disturbed Shinji just now, ha ha ha. And it's like, Shinji's not at all taken aback emotionally by Rei exploding.
Yeah, that's the concern, is that at first he seems kind of upset, but, overall, he's unfazed by this thing that should have traumatized him further. And then I want to say when he goes to get on the Wunder is like the same day.
Mm-hmm. It at least feels like it's within a very small time frame.
I do want to jump in and kind of give my thoughts as far as like the structure. Even though like the whole point of the Paris operation is just parts. That's really it. And so that Mari has something to do. Weirdly, I that's probably the part of the film that I like the most. It's just I think it's a cool set piece, just on its own. But like it's something that they could have very easily lost. And I know people like it, and it's kind of nice. But again, like I feel like you could get rid of the village, it's as well, completely. I don't feel like we really needed to, because that sequence is more about Ray Q having an end to her arc. And what I would have liked to have seen was something kind of like what Brandon was suggesting with the titles that we saw, followed by some sort of transition to the crew of Nerv and Vile. And I would have liked to have seen Shinji coming out of his PTSD through reconnecting with Masato. And I would have liked to have seen Ray Q fulfill her character arc connecting to Ray 2 somehow. The Ghibli sequence is nice, but I really don't feel like, aside from Shinji kind of getting out of his funk and reintroducing the tape player element, I really don't feel like the whole first 45 minutes of the film contributes anything to the plot of the whole rest of it.
Initially, when I speculated what this movie would be like internally, I thought Shinji was going to be on the Wunder after the first act, which I thought would be like 20, 25-ish minutes. And I thought he was going to have to reconnect with the crew there and sort of develop and move past it with that. I do think that there's some significance, though, to the fact that the Ghibli village is the setting, because it's so much more visually stimulating and like interesting to look at than the Wunder, which is a very Nadia-esque internal boat sort of situation. So from a director's perspective, just from a visual kind of perspective, I get the Ghibli village's inclusion. I totally agree with you with everything, with like just the fact that him connecting with Misato was one of the hugest plans in 3.0, and they almost have no scenes together, or no scenes together until she's shot and dying kind of deal and whatnot. And so that was like really strange of a move, I think.
Wasn't there a plot explanation for why they Misato didn't want to see Shinji? There was like the scene between Misato and Ritsuko. There was like a bunch of exposition.
Guilt.
Yeah, and why she didn't ever meet her son either.
I think that it's important to realize, though, that this movie was, Kaji Jr. is introduced in this film, and her explanation was given in this movie, and not in 3.0. So this movie could have done anything with Misato, and could have justified it. And so we could have easily had Misato regretting how she treated Shinji with the cold shoulder, and realizing that it was her fault that he even did something as insane as try and, like, cause another impact. And then she could have tried to deliberately reconnect with him. And as far as what she's done with Kaji Jr., I feel like it's almost worth just removing him. I don't see the benefit of having this character in the film as it exists right now. Anything can be done with this movie. It's Anno's has a blank canvas. It just has to adhere to the previous three. That's all.
I want to go into thoughts on Shinji's inactivity as a protagonist through much of the film. And with just one little note is Shinji doesn't really say, or aside from isolating himself, Shinji doesn't do or say anything for the first 35 minutes of the film. And generally speaking, he's very inactive as the protagonist throughout most of the film.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't have a problem with that because, as I think you said, that sequence is more about Ray Q and fulfilling her character arc and giving her something to do. And Shinji, I mean, so much of this film is just an antithesis to what was going on in the end of Evangelion film. So, I mean, he's basically being the character he was in the end of Evangelion, but with a different resolution. So his inactivity, I don't know, that felt completely on brand to me. The thing that I appreciated with that stuff is that how everyone was patient with him this time around. One of the big complaints that people had with Evangelion 3.0 was that everyone was just cruel to him and nobody wanted to talk to him or explain anything to him. And this time around, they're giving him time and space and being very patient with him. I thought that Toji and Kensuke were really interesting additions in how they approached him. And especially Kensuke was kind of an interestingly nuanced approach to handling Shinji's behavior. to me, aside from arguably the abruptness of him coming out of all of it, I thought that his behavior was pretty solid. I thought that it gave room for the other characters to kind of make their place known, for Asuka to kind of show her behavior when she's not just piloting an Evangelion and at Nerv, that kind of stuff. So I don't know. I thought that stuff worked fine.
Did you find it redundant at all compared to, like, we've done this before?
No, because it goes to a different place. I thought that if he just would have been in the corner of the room the entire 2.5 hours, then yes. But it was pretty clear that Anno wanted to turn Shinji into the hero, and pulling him out of his neurosis 45 minutes into this movie kind of did that. I mean, he even accepts just being put into an exploding room with no question, or if he gets his gets a DSS choker again, you know what I mean? He kind of is just like, I'm hero now, and I'm going to go along with it. And I don't know, yeah, like I said, I kind of agree that a lot of this just kind of comes out of nowhere and is abrupt, but so much of it is just Anno being old and not, I think Anno was like 35 or 40 when he made the end of Evangelion. And it's like it's just not the same guy. It's not the same filmmaker anymore. And he's married, which is a huge part of this movie, is Anno being married. And so it didn't bother me because the themes of it I thought were handled well, even if the individual minutia of the characters was kind of all over the place. I thought that the bigger picture things were handled pretty well.
I think I'm with Brendan on that. I had no problem with Shinji being quiet in the corner.
I will say this, okay, as a distinction between this and EOE, Shinji's circumstances made it so that he was active in his inactivity. So Shinji was refusing to do things and making choices in respect to what happened in End of Evangelion. And that is actually, I feel like that's more of an engaging tactic, where a character who doesn't want to do something is actively choosing not to do things that need to be done. And so it's like giving a character something to do in his inactivity. Ironically, I almost wonder if like this movie would have maybe benefited from Shinji trying to like kill himself or actually be suicidal in some way, just to engage more with the character, because I do think that does sort of, his inactivity and lack of choice making lends to that weird feeling of that switch turning on when he does go hero mode. So that's just one thing I have to say.
I think that Shinji's too cowardly for suicide, though. I think that that's like
Yeah.
a core value of him, is that he's too scared to live and die.
I kind of agree with you, but I was just like, it's just an example more than it is like an actual, like,
Sure.
It should have been this. It's
Yeah.
just like something to do with while being inactive, because EOE definitely had that, and I felt like Shinji was a little more engaging to watch. Like, you were just like, Shinji, come on, man! And like, you kind of, you're more engaged with the character in moment-to-moment events that are happening in that film, in contrast to this one.
The only thing I would say about that is that that's partially because of the NGE that came before that movie and the events that are going on around Shinji in that film, as opposed to, like, because if taking the position that the Ghibli stuff isn't great, then it doesn't matter what Shinji's doing, because if you're not invested in what's going on around him, then it's all just kind of falling apart at that point. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I kind of get what you mean. To me, it's a little bit of a problem. It's not a huge problem. This is definitely in the nitpicky kind of category, but it is a distinct difference between the two films.
I completely agree with that.
Yeah.
I was just going to say, I think that everyone was telling Shinji not to do anything in Evangelion 3.0, and so that's exactly what he's doing for the first, 40 minutes of this film.
I'm just really having trouble, again, reconciling that sort of switch to become a hero and to go on that hero's journey, because it really doesn't feel like he actually participates in the village for more than maybe 15 minutes. So it's sort of just like, it's a little rushed. It's just very rushed, I think, from that standpoint. But yeah, as you're saying, a lot of people really come away from this movie enjoying it, not for really what the movie is doing on a scene-by-scene basis, and more like the macro thematic and meta-narrative perspectives.
Yeah, that's exactly. There's certain things I kind of want to get into, but I think we'll get into them later. But I think that a lot of people found this film very cathartic, and so that's the stuff that people are responding, I know it's part of a big part of what I responded to because, well, I don't want to get too ahead. Sorry, Aaron.
I definitely think both could be done, though. Like, it could actually function as a proper film narrative character arc.
Yes.
Like, there is a way of doing that and having the meta-narrative, larger picture stuff. And I think it's just reallocating certain priorities and structural elements that would have allowed for that. So it's kind of... That's what's frustrating, I guess, from my perspective.
So something completely different. We kind of touched on this earlier, but thoughts on the seemingly endless sources of resources that Nerv has at its disposal, despite being apparently operated by only 2 or 3 people. Multiple airships, an incalculable amount of Evas, etc. Or does that question just kind of answer itself?
I saw memes about that, yeah. Fuyutsuki's obviously, he's in the back, just like constructing these MGS4 robots or whatever.
I just accept it as Anno indulging in his love of excess. I mean, that's not anything specifically new, I think.
What do you think about it, Chester?
I mean, I think it's just, you kind of wave your hand and say it's the mystery of Nerv or the mysterious power of Nerv, and you don't think too much about it. But yes, it is, one does think about that. It is an issue.
I mean, it was kind of funny in 3.0 how, like, lights were turning on and stuff like that. I'm like, just dramatic lights. It's just Fuyutsuki running the whole operation. Whatever. But it doesn't matter.
I imagine it's
super
just
nitpicky.
Fuyutsuki, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, meanwhile, Willie has, like, thousands of people manning their shit.
I wanted to say that I do think it's kind of ridiculous, but it's one of those things that I kind of give a pass just because it's weird. But the 2 parts of the film that I enjoyed the most were the Paris sequence and the Eva dive.
Everyone at Studio Kara knows exactly that every otaku in the audience is thinking this, and they just say it's what Anno wants. I'm sure that somebody was sitting there being like, why are there so many of these Evas? And Tsurumaki was just like, this is how it always is. And then based on the making of stuff, it's just like, they're all aware of it, but they just go along with it and say, yeah, this is just how it is. So I'll do that too.
I mean, I'm sure it's a fairly anime trope kind of situation where
Yeah.
you just have very few bad guys operating a really massive operation.
I guess it's just where is the manpower coming from is the real question, because the world is destroyed, so I guess that's what people are. That's the difference here. Yeah.
I think they just have those like birthing stations for those Evas. Based on Unit 13 was just like a big...
It's all automated.
Yeah, they had like
tube.
that womb thing. Yeah, exactly. But like, who built it? I guess it's a good question. But then it's probably in the time skip stuff.
Yeah, that was in the old. That was when they had manpower.
Yeah, when they did have manpower. There you go.
They had the interns working on that, and 16 years ago.
R&D was.
Yeah.
Exactly.
So that's probably a good point to talk about this. There definitely feels like there's a compression of time in which like a lot of stuff happened, because you've got like so the implication is that when near third impact happened, it's very vague, but in some aspects it makes it look like Kaoru interrupted it. In some cases there's things that make it look like Kaji interrupted it, but there's also like the seed banks that would have had to have been assembled beforehand somewhere in 2.0, but also when did the formation of Vile happen? There's like an uprising. Like, did all of this happen like the same day?
Yeah, it's very unclear.
There was something that I saw posted recently about what happened in that 14-year time skip with Kaoru and Kaji taking over Nerv. And have you read that? This stuff that happened. It was some theater presentation that Kaoru employees were at. You know what I'm talking about?
No.
Third impact happens. Gendo ousted. Kaoru and Kaji assume command in Gendo's absence. This aids Misato and Vile. Gendo resumes command at Nerv, uses Zele, another battle occurs that starts third impact. Kaji dies to stop third impact.
So, did Kaoru indeed throw down the Spear of Cassius at the end of 2.0 and then stopped it, and then there was another impact that happened?
Yes. Basically, everything that happened in the preview is canon. According to this presentation that happened in Japan at some point.
Hell yes, because I actually theorized that, so that's awesome.
Because what it is that like, because that's why they feel like they differentiated near third impact and third impact a lot more in this film than the last film. because yeah, it goes back to when they make Unit 8 or 9 autonomous. So Kaoru and Kaji are like heroic, and then Gendo and company make the Mark 6 autonomous, and that's what starts the actual third impact.
Yes, so then why does everyone blame Shinji, like in 3.0?
It's all near third impact stuff. They try to fix that, I think, in this film at that scene with the
but they're
the people
so
on the
mad.
bridge.
They feel
I
like
know.
that he killed them and whatever. He didn't, like, you know, and it's
I would not be
it's
surprised.
not him at all.
I would not be surprised if somebody was really like, Mr. Anno, I think you misunderstood your story here, because it's like they kind of went back and tried to fix that problem in the third film. I feel like, anyway.
Yeah, that's weird.
Isn't it? It is kind of strange that because they even say like that all happened at the near third impact, and if Shinji wouldn't have done it, we all would have died anyway. You know what I mean? It's kind of like an odd trying to fix something that was kind of jarring in the third film.
Yeah, that's strange. I think Kaoru's actions are strange again in the third film then, because if he's aware of everything, unless he's not, in which case this is like a new Kaoru from the coffin, in which case does he have continuity or not have continuity of memory? But then he's just like, yeah, Shinji, you caused this. And he's like, he blames it on Shinji and whatever. And I guess he's just not aware and doesn't have continuity of memory, but then does, because he says that, you know, I did the Book of Life and all this sort of stuff in the movie. Okay, this is weird. Like, this is going to be very, very confusing.
I think that some of the damage they're referring to is the near third impact stuff with Kaoru anyway, when he's talking to Shinji, because, you know, obviously a lot of people in Tokyo 3 died during that behavior. I mean, you see the entire city explode, don't you? I think there's that one shot where the entire, like, city explodes.
It's not like global or anything.
No, it's not global.
It's very much like the earth cracks open in this, but you know, like every time they defeat an angel, there's like a blood fountain of blood that sweeps over the city and destroys everything. So Tokyo 3 is like so used to massive destruction that you know, it's not really clear that Shinji's actually done anything really terrible in 2.0. Especially with the previews. You know, you see the previews, like if the preview is canon, there's like helicopters flying in, and a lot of the city looks intact, and there are people and like whatever. So it's very there. I think this speaks to a larger issue of like Anno needed more clarity in regards to delivering information in throughout these movies, and he needed more clarity himself on exactly what was happening at any given point on the timeline and what cause and effect, this leads to this, because I think Eva has a lot of internal consistency in NGE and plus EOE and whatnot. Like, it feels very much like they came up with like, oh, here are the factions and here's what they're doing at any given time on the timeline, and like here's what the Dead Sea Scrolls are, and like blah blah blah. And so they have some sort of Bible going on, like a series Bible, just like explaining what's happening. And maybe that was not the case for these movies. Maybe they didn't have like something like that. It's more improvisational or whatever. But yeah, maybe some clarity would have been nice. Because I'm very confused. So I think one of the goals of the rebuilds to begin with was to be more clear, right? Like, I'm pretty sure they said that in the marketing for 1.0. So
highly possible. I feel like we could talk for a couple of hours just about the lore itself.
Yeah.
But there are some other things that I'd like to get to. So one of the big ones that we definitely need to talk about is now that we've seen the whole series, how do we feel about Mari's role in it?
I don't know why everyone's so hung up about Mari's. It seems like it's because she's another Eva pilot. Like, she's touted to be the next Asuka, the next Rei. But why does nobody get up in arms about what is Maya's role, or what is Shigeru's role in the films? Like, so she's, this minor thing, and she's a new character. Yeah, but I mean, like, she's just like any other minor character. I understand the criticism, and I sort of, I'm on this podcast and in general maybe like the defender of the rebuilds, but I see where everyone's coming from, that like she's sort of inserted and doesn't really do anything all too significant.
Do you think that this series of films can do without her?
I haven't thought about it too much, honestly.
I like Mari. I liked Mari from her first appearance because she was so different from everything else. And I mean, especially in now the current context of Anno's wife and Mari, it all makes total sense. But
It does.
when she first, and like her entire place in the series makes sense. But when she first arrived, I was kind of thinking, oh, it's sort of like taking Asuka, but without all of the angst and making her into this she just wants to pilot because she really has a good time doing it, and that's it. There's no, you know what I mean? She was just kind of what, especially in 2, she was just this person who made kind of vague comments about her history with Kanji and that kind of stuff, but she was just kind of a fun character, and I enjoyed that she stood out from the rest of them because of that. And she kind of, to me, she fit the Rebuild world more at that point, because Rebuild had started to take this very like, where it's the happier, cleaner version of Evangelion. It's we're not 16 millimeter film anymore. This is all digital, clean, pretty animation, and she fit that world better than. And I'm used to with Shinji and Asuka and Rei. I was just used to them being so miserable all the time, that Mari was this character that seemed to have been clearly birthed into the Rebuild films purely, as opposed to coming with the baggage of the rest of the characters.
A breath of fresh air.
Exactly.
In the end, do you feel that she was effectively characterized?
I mean, she's pretty one-dimensional. I think she was effectively characterized in that she was very consistent the entire time. Whether Asuka's dying or not, she's still pretty much the same person. But in terms of her being, I mean, relative to the rest of the characters in Rebuild, I think she's pretty much on par. Like there's not a lot of depth to most of these characters in these films anymore. Like Rei is a lot of the characterization comes from the previous iterations of these characters.
Yes.
So I mean, like Misato, she gets a little, they get smatterings here and there, but they're not nearly as have the same depth that they did originally. So I think that she fits, again, I think she fits these films.
One of the things that I have said frequently over the years is that I think it's used as a tool. Like, people could argue that it's a strength, but I think it's a weakness that this series of films relies on the original as a sort of shorthand that these characters and their personalities, but it doesn't take enough time to differentiate itself from that. And where Mari is concerned, I would say that she makes this very clear because we don't have the existing shorthand for her character.
Right. So I think she's characterized pretty well in 2.0 for the most part, but they give her a lot of plants that don't have payoffs. Specifically that she's kind of a weird animalistic adrenaline junkie, and I'm not sure how that fits into Anno's view of his wife. I don't necessarily buy that she was meant to be Anno's wife. I feel like that was a retcon in 3.0+1.0. Like, even the fact that she likes reading books is just never alluded to, and that probably is something that's more akin to something that Anno's wife would be into. I think the reason why people hate her so much is that she is dropped into the story with a lot of intrigue. There's a lot of promise, like a lot of plants in 2.0, that you'll get answers to this character, that you'll understand like who she is. She's a spy, she's a secret agent, she has something to do in the story, but we don't know what she's doing in the story. It's like, it's all behind the scenes kind of stuff. And you expect that to pay off. Like, you expect there to be a payoff because there's a huge promise of that. And, even Anno doesn't help that he stoked the fires by saying that she's there to destroy Evangelion. As far as that goes, like, that could mean the cast of characters and the character dynamic or whatnot. But there's a lot of hype, a lot of marketing surrounding Mari, and I feel like her role at the end of the day is this very hand-wavy, well, Mari didn't get to do anything, so now she's my wife. This is the function. This is a purpose that, yeah, totally works, you guys.
Yeah, no, her function seems to be like, Shinji can no longer get with Asuka, so therefore he defaults to Mari. He can't get with Rei or Asuka, therefore he defaults to Mari. That seems like the ending a little bit.
Yeah, it's definitely by default kind of deal as well. And I think what's interesting is the fact that, like, why is Asuka in these movies? Because, like, at the end of the day, I love Asuka. She's my favorite character, but they probably, considering that she's one of the core original cast, I don't think they dealt with her super great. And that kind of, there's overlap between her and Mari, because like Asuka's supposed to be the bombastic, quote unquote talented pilot who's likes piloting Ava. I mean, not like addicted to it like Mari, but there's overlap in those characterizations. And so it's just like, if Asuka was going to compete with that, maybe it would have been better to just leave her out.
I think they should have just let her die when she was piloting Ava 3. Once again, the character that should have died piloting Ava 3 didn't actually die.
Yeah, I agree. Maybe she should have died.
Replaced her, yeah, if they would have just replaced her with Mari and done something that incendiary, it might have been effective. Chester, I actually do like the Rebuild films. Just to be clear, I thought they got better as they went along. The first two I'm not too into, but 3 and 4 I actually do like. Ultimately, even if I'm being critical of them right now.
I think that there's certain things that the films do and the function that they have, and that's not necessarily like equating to enjoying them. Does that make sense? So it's like, I think you can criticize it while still like it. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I mean, I'm doing it right now.
So the next major thing that I'd like to talk about, and I'll start us off for this, is ultimately, the main emotional hook for this entire film is Shinji confronting his father and forcing his father to address his own issues pertaining to Yui, and the fact that while he lost Yui, he has pushed away Shinji, which is, Yui's legacy. Metaphorically, that's where she's been the whole time. It did not do very much for me. My brain just, like, after being punched in the face for like a half hour with lore, like real deep lore, going into and finding out what the film is really ultimately about, which is, I've heard that a good chunk of it is, Anno's issues with his father, who I've heard, has passed away, that he never was able to reconcile certain things with his father, who was abusive to him. He used to hit and kick him. That's really where all of this is coming from, so I understand that. But my brain just kind of checks out at that point.
I don't think it was like particularly... I didn't understand it fully, but I don't have such a strong emotional reaction to it, I suppose. Not that it was super clear. And yeah, I understand your criticism that like it didn't make that much sense of like why he loved Yui so much, and if Shinji was the closest thing he had to Yui, why he wasn't, taking better care of Shinji. Although there was some level explanation now that I think about it. It was he saw it as some level of punishment towards himself by distancing himself from Shinji, right? Wasn't there that? I've only seen the movie once with subs, that's the thing. I've seen it 4 times in the cinema without subs, but only 1 time with subs.
There's another layer to this that somebody actually asked about that I wanted to make sure we kind of touched on, is the fact that in these films, Yui is less of a character at this point and more of an idea. Like, she doesn't actually say anything in this film. She just, basically they reuse some dialogue from 1.0, which is her considering the names Rei and Shinji. And if I'm not mistaken, that's the only spoken dialogue she has in all 4 films.
Right, that might be true. Here's the interesting thing, though, is that since 4.0 makes NGE part of the story, we kind of have to include NGE as part of the analysis, so to speak. Right.
Maybe.
So the fact, but then Yui has lines in NGE, so therefore doesn't that solve the problem? It's part of the vernacular if you're an Eva fan watching this film.
I'm confused if it's literally tied into NGE or if it's just like the part of the meta narrative of it. That's what confuses me.
Oh, it's tied in. I was so over the moon when I saw that shit.
As far as Gendo's relationship with Shinji goes, the resolution of this is sort of weird to me, because Gendo was a pretty neglected figure in 3.0, which is the movie predecessing this one, and Shinji doesn't really care about what Gendo's doing or what's going on there. And in 2.0, he also really doesn't care for the second act, what Gendo is like up to. The 2.0 begins and opens with Shinji and Gendo at the grave, and then the first act ends when he tries calling Gendo and Gendo doesn't answer. And then Shinji is pretty like father head empty for the entire second act. It's Rei who's trying to get them together. And it's just strange how they de-emphasize Gendo only to emphasize him super hard at the ending. And it really can only be read in this metatextual way of like Anno resolving his feelings with his father, which I think have this very... I disagree with the mentality that Anno is bringing to the table here. As somebody who has had an abusive father, my father was violent towards myself and my mother. Not necessarily emotionally neglective like Gendo is in this way, but I think that it's important to realize that negative figures like this in your life really don't need understanding or reconciling with. I have no regrets never seeing him again. And that's like, maybe that's just me speaking now, but a lot of my friends who like Evangelion also have father issues. And so that was one thing that, at least for my friend group and myself, I was pretty disenchanted with, was the idea that you have to like confront your father. You have to like talk with them and engage with them and try to understand them and take them apart when they've been abusive to you as a child. Like child abuse. That's pretty crazy. Like, they're an adult. Gendo's a grown-ass man. And, like, he definitely neglected his child deliberately for completely selfish and inane reasons. And it's like, I don't think that there's anything to be redeemed there or understood. And I feel like Gendo does get the short, or the long end of the stick in some ways at the end of the day, because the last image we see of him is like orgasming with Yui naked or whatever. And it's just like, he gets what he wants, and it's sort of crazy. Like, I felt like I sympathized with him more and understood him in the context of Neon Genesis, but I was glad that they didn't give him a redemption arc or have like Shinji really confront him in that traditional way, because I think Shinji accepts his father at the end in the final episode of Neon Genesis Evangelion in his own mind, but he didn't like give him a speech or like reconcile with him. He's just like, my father exists and I'm here thanks to him, and so I'm thankful for that. But that's really, I think this was very melodramatic and Steven Universe-esque to try to redeem someone like Gendo.
This kind of reminds me of something I was thinking when I was watching the Ghibli section of this movie, which is that a lot of this almost felt like Anno reacting to Hayao Miyazaki and sort of saying, I can do this. And I was thinking of Michael, listening to you talk about not punishing Gendo the same way. I was thinking of Miyazaki complaining about American media being too violent and too interested in punishing people, and it almost felt like I'm going to do that too. I'm going to redeem one of our major villains from this entire series and saga and give him a more humane send off, as opposed to being bitten in half by an Evangelion.
Through the power of empathy.
Yeah, like I was thinking, one of the big jokes of Naruto is talk no jutsu, and that kind of sums up a lot of stuff going on in this film is talk no jutsu, and it's sort of almost like Chester was talking about anime tropes. To me, Michael, I agree with you. Maybe because I have father issues also, but at the same time, it was kind of like I just kind of accepted it because of the medium, that I've seen this before in this medium, and I'm used to it and almost conditioned to see this kind of stuff happen in anime. So maybe that was part of why I didn't react that negatively to it, just because it seemed like something that has happened before in this medium.
Yeah, but a part of Evangelion was like, I watched it when I was 14, when I was having real issues reconciling my identity and my father's identity. And so that helped me a lot. And this feels more like a punch in the dick in that respect. So
sure.
Yeah.
I can understand from a personal reaction. I mean, every form of art requires a personal reaction too.
For sure.
So
for sure.
I totally understand where you're coming from.
Yeah, and I just don't necessarily think it's like a super positive message, like the whole kill your father or hug him, like Kensuke says that. And it's like, Kensuke says Kaji said that, and Kaji is sort of...
Oh, it's Misato.
Really? Okay, yeah.
Misato tells him. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And I think that it's just weird how that's sort of taken as this objective truth in this. There's no like C where it's like, I want to have like nothing to do with him, but I can still be like happy or like accept the pain that he gave me or something. It's like, it's just weird. I don't know. So
I think again it's Anno. It's Anno. It's Anno's worldview. That you're hearing, and it's what was he 65-year-old Anno's worldview. So it's a little different.
for sure. And maybe it's because I'm young myself. You know, I'm not as old as he is that I feel this way. Maybe my mind will change later down the line. But
well, yeah, and I actually that's a topic that I want to get into because I think I'm like the elderly person in the room currently.
Yeah,
and,
go for it.
And well, it's just I think that a lot of it. And that's sort of what I was getting at with the catharsis of this film is that I think that the older you get, the more the happy endings become more attractive anywhere you can find them. And so that's an aspect of this where I love the end of Evangelion. It's one of my favorite films of all time, let alone anime films. But that film is very aggressive and very angry. And even though you can read between the lines and find the optimism in it, it doesn't feel that way. I mean, that last scene is just such a kick in the balls that it's like, it doesn't even matter if it's a happy ending or could potentially be a happy ending. It still makes you feel sick. So finding that this film took a more positive spin on all of these people and tried to give everyone a satisfyingly happy ending. In the context of the Rebuild films, I'm totally on board with that because I've already seen the other one and I get it and I like it more, but I wanted something different. And I liked Rebuild the more it differentiated itself from NGE.
Have you read Sadamoto's manga? How do you feel like that ending contrasts this one?
I actually never read the manga. I'm not much of a manga guy.
Brendan, for shame.
It ends in a very similarly happy way, but arguably I think is more satisfying.
That's
than
what
this
I've
ending.
heard. Yeah.
So it's sort of it's interesting that and arguably Neon Genesis Evangelion, the original TV ending was a more overt happy ending. So we've had happier, more, or it's more of like telling you be happy, you know, kind of endings before. Right. And it's like EOE is the long lasting one because it's the excellent quality of filmmaking, the excellent execution of everything.
It's all of these great artists at the peak of their careers. I mean, I don't think that I could make the argument that Anno's at the peak of his career right now, the same way he was 25 years ago.
Oh yeah, sure. And I love Shin Godzilla. I think it's a great film. It's not a character-driven film, but it's a great film, and it's you know, Japan recognized it as this excellent piece of work, and I think he has more excellent works to give, but EOE is definitely like far and away the iconic one that will be like, for those who have seen it, will last like a lifetime with people. I think that's one of those movies, but yeah, I like the idea of a happy ending for 3.0+1.0. I was prepared for that. I kind of joked, like, we're going to get, like, Shinji and everyone on the beach together, and they're all going to wave at the camera and whatever. Like, I was expecting something happy in that regard. What took me off guard was just the approach to it, the emphasis on Gendo, the kind of almost cheeseball nature of the finale, because, like, it is more of like something like Steven Universe, if you've ever seen or heard of that, where it's these characters trying to redeem unredeemable characters through like the power of love and like I'm not saying that Shinji like is loving his father or whatever at the end of the day, but you know, the power of understanding. Yeah. You
would hate Naruto, so don't watch Naruto.
One of the things I did want to talk about, just kind of mention it mainly, is that the manga by character designer Yoshiyuki Sadamoto also features a similar ending where like there's a rewrite, you know, of reality, and it plays into the sort of sequel theory or the loop theory. Personally, like kind of having read that and then having watched this movie, I liked how Sadamoto approached that idea better. I felt that it was more emotionally satisfying. And there's another thing too, is that at the end of that, there's an extra stage that goes back to the university days university research days with Fuyutsuki, Gendo, Yui, and Mari is also there. So they kind of use the ending of the manga, which ended between 3.0 and final, to sort of imply that connection once again. So with that in mind, the consensus is not 100%, but do we agree or disagree that the sequel theory or loop theory, is entirely valid, that that's what is happening here? Or is Rebuild its separate continuity that has its own looping? As an NGE does not directly link in to the loop of Rebuild. Did I explain that?
Yeah.
So Chester, we kind of talked about this before. Do you have you sort of revised your thoughts at all as far as how Neon Genesis hooks into Rebuild? Because in final, it kind of seems like Neon Genesis is where we're rebooting to, but the final scene shows something completely different with older Shinji and Mari together. So have you had any time to kind of think about how you think these two hook together?
I think NGE happens and then the rebuild happens.
So you do believe that Rebuild is the loop after Neon Genesis?
I don't know about what you're saying about loops. I think that the order, it's like the watch order, and it happens in that order. It starts with the NGE, EOE, and then the rebuilds 1, 2, 3, 4. Not too sure what you're mentioning with regarding to the looping.
So he's saying that, like, the timeline kind of resets after NG and Shinji and Asuka and everyone can, like, try again, sort of deal, after NGE.
After NGE.
So, yeah. So we go into the rebuild, right? And it's the NGE characters, and they went back in time or something. And so rebuild starts with a back in time, where, like, the characters are back in time. So, yeah.
I see. Well, no, I think, but okay. Then basically, yeah, I think it's just NG and then loops into rebuild.
Gotcha.
Pretty simple interpretation.
Brennan, any thoughts about the loops?
I think that the Kaoru scene really kind of, I would prefer it not to be that way, but I think the Kaoru scene with his coffins on the moon pretty much lays that out, at least on some level. That's what they're trying to say. But to me, it almost doesn't matter because, like I said earlier, it's so the separation between the two is so long that it's like clearly that wasn't the plan to begin with 25 years ago. So if you're into it and you like the looping part of the story, then that's great and have fun. I'm sure there'll be plenty of cool theories that come out of that stuff and how things connect to each other. But at the same time, it almost doesn't change anything if you consider Rebuild its own thing and NGE its own thing. It doesn't really... It only overlaps if you want it to, I guess.
Yeah.
That's true. You can watch them separately if you wanted to, yeah.
I don't think that they're actually connected in the sense that, when Anno was wrapping up production on End of Eva, which I don't think End of Eva contradicts Neon Genesis Evangelion's ending, really. It's a remake of them. It's just like the same story, but retold with the physicality added in and whatnot. At least that's how I've always felt about it. It's just as simple as like, oh, I gotta remake those last 2 episodes, here we go, and whatever. But I don't think when he was wrapping production, he had this like idea of Rebuild. Rebuild is very much a product of the legal actions between Kara and Anna, what would become Kara and Gynex, and kind of taking that property and then trying to start a studio with an existing IP that has notoriety behind it. So rebuilds are a consequence of not like an idea or a story that he was necessarily burning to tell, in my opinion, but more of just like what was practical and like worth doing. And having hints at some kind of time loop at the start would add intrigue, get fans talking for years, and it did. It succeeded in that respect. The stuff like with Kaoru on the coffins on the moon with the Book of Life, and he's just like, oh, Book of Life, I wrote Shinji's name in there. And I think it's so comical to think about episode 24, like Kaoru, like, he has the Book of Life. It's his journal. It's just his Book of Life on the front. He's writing, like, Shinji and Kaoru / fiction in it. And it's destined to repeat time until they're together or something. It's kind of wonky and strange. The entire concept of it being a sequel, I really agree with Brent, that I hope it's not really, because I do think it lessens the impact if you do consider it canon, if you accept it canon and you care about stuff like canon, that it's like, oh, Shinji at the beach with Asuka, Kaoru's just off screen and he's like, Shinji, I have the Book of Life. We're going to reset now, and then like everyone resets. That sort of idea is insane. So I really hope that that's not the case. But I think it might be the case, and I know the reason why sequel theory was implemented. It was just to get the fandom discussing, and I'm a little cynical about about it itself, like its implementation in it. So, yeah, it's that's probably one of my least favorite aspects of the rebuilds, is just the sequel theory stuff.
Yeah, so that's one of the criticisms that people have, is that if there is a looping or a resetting of the universe every then a lot of the choices and the outcomes of End of Evangelion are effectively underscored.
Yeah, it's really undermines like a lot of the things that actually happened in it, and it upsets me a little bit. And there seems to be some like weird allusions to it, right? Where you have the End of Evangelion scene with Asuka on the beach, where she's like grown out of her plug suit and now looks like she's from a hentai dojin or something. So it's like
The only thing about that scene where I think that scene was just supposed to be symbolic in a callback, because I don't think that that's supposed to actually literally be Asuka from the End of Evangelion, just because, if I'm going to get super like fixated on this stuff, is the moon's wrong. The moon's the moon from Rebuild. It's not the moon that's on the beach. And they recreate everything else so directly and perfectly that it seems like a weird oversight to do this scene, but to have the moon be like obviously the moon from Rebuild.
That's a great point. I think what's confusing me is just like, why is it Asuka's plug suit from End of Eva instead of like Shikanami's plug suit or whatnot? Yeah, it's just a visual callback.
Just to be a visual callback and to make nerds talk on the internet in a Google room.
Yeah, you're probably right. I think it's meant to get you to think about it, and maybe just like Anno's just like having Shinji reconciling with Asuka and symbolically apologizing for what he did at the start of Evangelion.
I mean, it's so weird though to think about that, to think of how the End of Evangelion starts versus anything that happens in these movies, and then that they're supposed to be the same franchise. You know what I mean? It's like, it's so incredibly different.
Yeah, it is. It really is. I would say that the that opening scene in EOE is probably one of the most bold things they could have done in animation, like, ever. Without getting into specifics, because I don't know if you're gonna bleep it if I literally say what Shinji did. But everyone knows what Shinji did.
They do,
and it's like, holy crap! That scene is one of the most shocking scenes I think I've seen in any movie. Like, to this day, I've seen like thousands of films, and I'm just like, that one is so crazy, and could only be done in animation, because no way you're gonna do that with like live action actors who are that age. So it's just like, dang.
Here's what I want your son to do, ma'am. Here's the script.
Yes. Exactly.
I think everybody understands like when you say that something is meta.
Mm-hmm.
But something, Michael, that you've touched on a couple times over the past couple days with this film is, I think, was it meta narrative?
Meta narrative, yeah. Well, the meta.
So, can you explain or just kind of talk about briefly the difference between something being meta and an actual meta narrative?
So a meta-narrative is a story that's kind of told outside of the fourth wall, so to speak. Like, it's outside, it's within the author's life, where around the circumstances of the franchise or product itself. And it's a story specifically that is running in tandem and parallel symbolically or overtly within the actual fictional narrative. So that's commenting on something outside of the fictional narrative. So say, for example, I don't remember the name of that film, but there was this short film that was a meta-narrative about the director's life, and it was sort of symbolically represented through this girl prancing in a field, and it's kind of like about his life and his daughter and all that sort of stuff, and there's a story beyond the story that's kind of happening underneath the surface. That's what's going on, but it usually has to do with something outside of the fictional realm, like in reality.
I think what you're referring to is, I think it's called the big radish, where Anno is growing radishes in a field that the radishes represent the works.
That's a good example of one, actually, but no, that wasn't what I was thinking, but that's a good example.
In this film, it gets very meta towards the end with the instrumentality scene where, you actually see the 3D camera controllers that they use to actually shoot the scenes, because most of the elements, including the characters, are 3D.
Yes, those are meta elements, but they're not a meta narrative. Yeah.
At a certain point, Unit 1 gets knocked back into a wall. That's a sort of a Truman Show type, backdrop, where there's a limit to the universe that they're inside of when they're in the imaginary world. But then there's also like a ton of animation references to prior Rebuild films, but also NGE, and a ton of stuff from EOE. The visuals of Lilith rising off the cross with the skin or whatever peeling off of the bolts, Asuka on the similar beach setting. So I think the question is, from like an aesthetic storytelling perspective, what do we think about the reuse of all these elements, and how there's all these callbacks to End of Evangelion, how it's almost like the last movement of the film is almost like a remix of End of Eva. And also, how do we feel about the tokusatsu fight sequence where it looks like a video game, and also that very weird imaginary Evangelion face? What do you think about like the aesthetics of this entire final sequence, and how there's so many references in it, and the differing like animation styles?
I have no idea what it means, but I am all with it. I'm all for it because it just seems cool. I mean, there's a lot of references, like when Rey was crying and she was like, "Oh, are these my tears? This isn't the first act." Going back to the meta narrative, the thing Michael was talking about in the first act, it was, when Shinji's just in the little white tower regretting his actions with near third impact and everything, or bringing out near fourth, actually. I mean, isn't that Anno regretting his actions with 3.0 and Q? But yeah, visually, I'm all for it. I don't know what there is to not be all for about. I was like, my mind was blown when they were just projecting that shot of the montage from EOE onto the screen when Shinji was talking to Rey 2.0.
Brendan, how did you feel about all of the callbacks to End of Evangelion?
For the final film in the series, it seemed poetic. Like, I'm not surprised they went that way, especially if this is the end of the timeline for Evangelion, like Anno kind of has said. Even if they go back and do other prequel-ish movies, or the time skip film that he kind of referred to recently, this is still the end of the line, and so I'm not surprised at all to see them do all of the visual callbacks to get the emotions going in the audience, especially the audience that's been watching it for the entire duration since the 90s. So it didn't bother me. It seemed like what they were going to do. I loved the tokusatsu sequence. I thought that, so much of the end of Evangelion was deconstructionist filmmaking. They were, shooting the cells from behind during one sequence, and things like that were really creative ways to kind of turn the animation on its head. And so to do that bad of CG animation for the seminal fight with Gendo and Shinji. I thought that was cool. I thought that it was a way of doing the fight but making it weird and different. I liked the way the buildings just kind of fell over in mass, like it was just like a clearly a model building that was falling over, and not trying to animate the windows breaking and the whole thing falling apart. I liked all that stuff. I liked crazy Uncanny Valley Ray or Lilith, that was, deconstructing what they did in the end of Evangelion and kind of making it familiar but weirder. I totally understand why people find it funny. I totally understand why people don't take it seriously, because I think that it's tempting to, on some level, people who are uncomfortable with it will laugh at it, and that's fine. And then some people just find it funny because it's ridiculous looking. So it's just interesting how people react differently to that kind of stuff. But so, yeah, overall, I thought that the aesthetics at the end were on point for Anno and for Evangelion, frankly.
I agree with most of that, but the imaginary Ava's Uncanny Valley face, to me, was really distracting and took me out of it. The whole suspension of disbelief, it just kind of ruined that for me.
I totally get it.
There's a couple of aspects of this movie that felt like funny unintentionally, to be honest. I thought there was some B-movie qualities even apart from what we're discussing. Like Sakura's ass in the camera as she shot Misato. That was unintentionally funny. It's sort of, there's a little bit one too many things that are unintentionally funny before giant Giga Ray head comes out, and then I was hollering like hysterical laughter because I thought it was so bad looking that and out of place that it just was humorous to me. Like I thought it was hilarious. And the same with the tokusatsu stuff. It was like guffaw worthy. I wonder if, like, I think that the tokusatsu stuff makes sense to me as far as, like, we're deconstructing the concept of CGI in general and how we use CGI in the film. Maybe that's a little undermined by cutting occasionally to 2D animation, because there was motion capture with it, but then sometimes it would, like, there'd be cuts to 2D proper, like, digital cell animation. So that was, like, maybe that kind of undermines that a little bit. If they had really leaned into the mocap 3D for the whole thing, that might have helped just clarify that metatextual point. The photorealistic Ray head, though, like, I think that's too much. I feel like that's way too risky to do with an iconic image, just as far as, like, even people who love this film, like 80% of the people who I've talked to who love this film said that they were laughing or they thought it was funny. I think that was probably just a miscalculation, whereas, like, shooting the backs of cells or something like that is fine. Like, nobody's going to react weirdly to that. That's just kind of revealing the reflexive nature of the filmmaking. There's ways of approaching it that aren't so aggressively uncanny valley. But as far as, like, how it ties into EOE and all that, I think it was expected that there would be a lot of EOE callbacks. I was actually surprised that there wasn't more, if I'm going to be frank. But I don't really mind the repurposing of End of Evangelion iconography as long as it isn't linked literally to it. Because I think that, the stuff with the Asuka on the beach, like you're saying, with the subdivided moon, that's probably okay to reuse that motif, albeit the objectification of the character notwithstanding, which I think... Do we have a section that we talk about the role of women in the rebuild? Because I think that should be discussed.
It was a question. I think it kind of speaks for itself that it is gratuitous.
I've never thought of Evangelion as misogynistic until this movie, which I know that's a very harsh word.
There's a lot of butts.
Yeah, there is a lot of butts, a lot of de-emphasis of female roles, like we were discussing Yui and her importance into it, and it's like, okay, a lot of de-emphasis of Asuka and her role in the story, a lot of, like, Mari feels like an obligation to the male character of Shinji Ikari, like, it's just like, oh, of course, he's going to wind up with a woman, and of course it's going to be this way. And I never felt that way with NG or EOE, because while it used objectification and the male gaze, and it had misogynistic elements to it, it was a criticism. It largely encased that into like, this is a teenage boy's point of view. He is a little misogynistic. He's going to have to learn to get over it. Like sort of deal. This is negative. The scene at the start of EOE is very like disturbing, and it's framed that way. Whereas like here we get male gaze shots left and right of characters in like inopportune times, like in very serious dramatic moments, and it's just like, what is this? I've never seen Anno kind of like do something like this as far as that goes. What are your guys' opinions on like the role of women in the rebuild versus NGE and like EOE? Because I think it's interesting of a subject.
I thought it was interesting actually in the beginning of the Paris operation. All the Willy, it was really men versus women, right? It's Gendo and Fuyutsuki, the men, versus Ritsuko, Maya, Mari, Misato up on the Willy.
And Nagara controlling the light fibers.
Yeah, so I thought that was interesting. All the men that are in that scene that belong to Willy were underlings of Maya, right?
Mm-hmm. How do you think that reconciles with the way that the camera is like?
Yeah, there's fan servicey camera angles. Not too much, especially in the beginning. More so towards. Yeah, I thought it was strange, like when the Sakura versus Misato part, right, where it was just a lot of butt shots. And yeah, it did feel like it was undermining kind of the drama, but I felt like it was also present perhaps during the climax arc of Nadia. If you think back on the shots of Elektra, like when she was electrocuted and her sort of proto plug suit was like burned off and that kind of thing. So I don't think it's utterly unprecedented, but yeah, I mean, I'm not like, oh, I'm great. Thank God there were butt shots or anything like that.
I mean, I feel like in 2021 though, it's a little different, you know. So, especially with complete creative control of the movie.
Well, I think it is Anno though.
I would argue that Evangelion has always been this way. That there is that dichotomy of strong, well characterized female characters, but also a lot of fan service. And I would say that it's gotten more bold as time has gone on, and it can definitely be kind of distracting. One shot that is very vivid in my head is the shot of Sakura sort of collapsing forward, and it's shot from behind, and like there's just like the butt is fully you see like basically up into the underside of the crotch, like the pubis mons, like that whole everything is just very front and center, very well defined. Like it's like, here's all the stuff.
Well, also the Asuka plug suit, which is torn up in an emotional moment.
Mm-hmm.
Like there's that. There's the stuff with Mari and Asuka together, and there's this weird pseudo lesbianism between the two, and they're like, there's a lot of objectifying angles there. There's like a lot of when they're flying in space, we got like excellent crotch shots. I'm saying excellent sarcastically. It's just strange to really emphasize those elements in the final entry of the franchise, and like in a movie where Mari, a character who is barely has any role in the film, in the plot of the film at all, is like just like gets with the male main character out of nowhere, kind of as like obligation to this like heteronormative role. It's just weird. Like, I don't know.
I do think this is a important topic, in terms of like, the fandom and this work itself. It's a great big rabbit hole, and that's not even getting into the sexualization of minors, which has become a very big topic within the fandom in the past several years, as well as the broader anime fandom. So it's a worthwhile discussion, but it deserves its own discussion. So, did you like the ending in terms of the reset and how Shinji ended up in the new world with Mari?
Yeah, I guess that was a bit strange that he just created this world where there's no Evangelions, And the weird thing is just like I've seen the movie 4 times, like barely understanding that aspect of it, and that the point of it where it was he reset a universe where there were no Evangelions was only hit home rather clearly in the fifth rewatching of the film. So I think a lot of my experience with the film was much more just visceral and general mood. Did you like how the music and the visuals made you feel rather than the specific narrative of the film, which I wasn't entirely clear on. As for conceptually the resetting of the universe, yeah, I'm not a huge fan of it. It just seems like a bit of a cop out to just say, this world sucks, but because we have this supernatural power, we can just, snap our fingers.
In a way, they don't resolve the existing world, they just jump to a new one, right?
Yeah, it's just like we just take all the Infinity Stones and we snap our fingers and we're going to create a world without sin, so to speak.
Chester, what do you think of the line where they're like, it's not redoing because you can't redo, because in the last movie we said you couldn't redo, it's rewriting or whatever it is. It's rebuilding or something.
I don't understand what happened. Is it really just Shinji basically got all the Infinity Stones and snapped his fingers and recreated reality instead of...
I believe that's the implication, yes.
Right? So, I mean, but all of that, barring all of that, I like the instrumentality of all the characters, of like re-examining Asuka and Kaoru and Gendo, and revisiting Rei too. But then... And the god slaying scene with Gendo and Yui, that was interesting as well. But yeah, now that actually I only watched it with subs last night. Now that I finally understand what happened with the resetting of reality, And then we show up in Anno's hometown. Did everyone realize that?
Yes.
What's the name of his hometown again? I can't believe I forgot. Ube, right? But I enjoyed the drone shot of them going up over Ube and spinning around over to the industrial area, and sort of Anno giving a shout out to his hometown and maybe getting it's a little bit more tourism money. But I like that aspect of it.
Just have to open an Anno museum there.
Yeah, they should. Well, there's really nothing there. I've been actually. It's kind of just like a really barren town, and there's not a lot of activity there.
Shinji and Mari are prancing off into the sunset to do nothing. So, go on.
Yeah. There's nothing there. It's midday too, but yeah. I maybe it'll take some more time for me to digest actually what actually occurred in that last bit of the ending.
I have a question. Do you guys think that, because there seems to be two ways of looking at this, either everything got reset and Shinji is there and it's the whole reality or whatever, and then there's this other idea that Asuka and Kensuke and everybody else is left behind in the messed up post near fourth impact world, and Shinji went off with Mari and Kaoru and Rei, although potentially Asuka's there too.
Yeah, she's like in the background.
Yeah, so this is what I mean, but there's contradictory information in this, because they show the escape pods landing back at the village, and Asuka's entry plug is there at the train yard. But then what's the point of showing that if all of that gets reset anyway? You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah, it is strange.
And saying Asuka's going and say hi to Ken, bye Asuka, but then it doesn't matter because I'm resetting everything anyway. Also, on top of that, Shinji wasn't even going to be part of the reset anyway, because he was going to kill himself until Yui stopped him and kicked him out of the anti-universe or whatever it was called. You know what I'm talking about?
Yeah, he was supposed to self-sacrifice or whatnot.
So,
yeah.
And it's only because of Yui and Gendo that he even escaped that whole situation. So it's just a little mixed messaging going on at the end there that's kind of off-putting.
Obviously, I'm super not a fan. Even from a filmmaking perspective, the ending shot is if you compare the first image of EOE and the first image of this movie, it's terrible. It's just a worm's eye view of the Eiffel Tower. in 3.0+1.0, where it was like a long shot of Shinji alone on the beach with a headless angel, and like you get his thought process, you get the like symbolism. It's about loneliness. And then the last shot of EOE is obviously super iconic with Shinji and Asuka on the beach and the MPAVs in the background. And then here we get like AB hotels, and it's like, I don't know. From a filmmaking perspective, that's a really underwhelming way to end the franchise, and so I was kind of annoyed by that. I think that if he had done something with his hometown earlier, like I know Gendo's hometown looked exactly like this as well. Like maybe you could have implemented the live action footage there, because Gendo's hometown I think is supposed to be Anno's hometown. At least that's what they're implying. So, but yeah, I think just ending it like that was kind of weird. The last lines being big boobs, nice girl, kind of. Oh, I'm sorry, I was just like rolling my eyes to the moon as far as that goes.
See, all that stuff works for me in the if you look at these films in a vacuum is the thing. Like there's no way they're going to top the beach scene from the end of Evangelion.
Yeah.
And so if I take out that experience of seeing that scene and just think of it as it's much more pedestrian, it's much more orthodox to have end on this wide shot of the city, but it's the whole Rebuild series just kind of feels more conventional, so it still fits that arc to me, I guess.
There was I can't remember who it was. It Martin Scorsese, but somebody said like the first like 3 shots of a film, if the director is good, and I think that's
oh no, don't be mean to Anno.
I think it's a really no. I think he's a great director. I just I feel like his methods were flawed in this particular film, and his mentality, because he said like, oh, I really want interesting angles, and like
that line that stood out. That was a problematic line to hear from him, because it turned into like, shouldn't you be worrying more about the script at this point than worrying about getting angles?
How about angles that reflect the story? Like, what helps the story? That's what's interesting to me as far as cinematography goes, and it's like, how are the shots reinforcing the characters and the plot and the story and the themes? And so it's just like when you open up with that sort of it really sets a tone for a lower bar of filmmaking throughout the whole thing, because I think most movies open up very well and close very well, first and last impressions, and so it's kind of like that last impression was like a sour. It was sour for me, but with Mari and Shinji and them getting together, removed from the Miyoko Anno stuff, it is like, wow, like you didn't give her and him like pretty much anything together. It was shocking to me that she wound up with him when she was introducing herself and her name for the very first time halfway through the movie with him, and then they had like almost no scenes after that, and then it's just like, wow, really? And this movie has a weird theme going on with like how every character has a love interest of some kind. Like, everyone kind of winds up with this partner of some sort. Like, we have, like, all the shipping happening with everyone. Even Kaoru and Rei are together at the end. Oh, I really don't like that. That killed me a little bit inside. Just as an LGBT person myself, because it's just like, that's a whole thing. But, it feels weird that it's just like, get a woman, touch grass is kind of the last takeaway I get from the film. And on a thematic level and a message level, it's like, we don't need Evangelion anymore, wish it away, even though it was a symbol of responsibility and meant textually, like Evangelion was a tool for being responsible, and the whole point was that Shinji was running away from piloting Eva, running away from his responsibility. So to wish it away is contradictory to like the overall themes of Evangelion as a franchise, but then in this movie, it's asking us to think about it as like a meta thing specifically, and be like, goodbye to Evangelion, the franchise. I'm leaving it behind, which is all nice and everything until the meta narrative continues beyond, where Anno's announcing new Evangelion projects, like a movie to explain what happens in between 2.0 and 3.0. So it's sort of like he's not really leaving the franchise, really, when you think about it. And I think the wishing away Eva stuff, it doesn't work for me. I really don't like it. It is redoing. the whole point of 3.0 was you cannot redo, and they tried to lampshade it with some dialogue here and be like, well, we're not technically redoing or anything, but it is totally redoing, and creating a new world or whatever, and escaping, escaping into reality, sure, but it's still escaping. And I think that it would have been more poignant for Shinji to have helped rebuild the world as it existed in the fictional realm of Village 3 and everything like that. That would have been far more satisfactory to me. And the Mari stuff just feels like, again, get a wife, you'll be happy, go touch grass, get outside, run around in Uwe or whatever. So it's
this is tangentially related. Something that I found really offensive was not letting Megumi Ogata do the final lines for Shinji. That really rubbed me the wrong way.
Oof.
I don't know if you guys were aware of this, but yeah, she wasn't allowed to. They recast Shinji in the last scene of ostensibly Evangelion, and that just seemed so horribly wrong and offensive. And I don't. I guess I kind of understand it, but I just hate it. It doesn't matter if I get it. I hate it.
She's amazing. She's an amazing seiyuu, and she owned this character. I totally think, I don't care if he's old. I wouldn't bat an eye if it was still Megumi Ogata's voice coming out of Shinji.
Did Spike Spencer do?
Yeah, he did.
I didn't listen to the dub. He did. Okay, interesting.
Yeah, they recasted her because they wanted to make it seem older, or
Spencer got more respect than the original VA. So that was something I wrote that down, and I was just like, oh yeah, I need to complain about this, because that was one thing that really, that's probably my biggest problem with this film, was that moment. I was like, are you kidding me?
So what do you think the ending is, Chester and Brendan, what is the meta narrative at the end of the day in regards to Anno's relationship to the franchise, and specifically with Mari and Shinji winding up together, that is just him and his wife, or what does that mean about happiness and how to achieve it in Anno's current worldview?
I think that I remember when this film first was released, and the rumors that were going on about it on various forums, and there was this idea that there was an underlying please go out and procreate message behind this, due to Japan's birth rates, and I wouldn't be surprised by that, even if it seems kind of not an Anno thing to do. But then again, ending this film the way that it does end doesn't seem like a very Anno thing to do, to me anyway. So I think that it only exists and only works within the meta narrative of him and his wife. I mean, it just comes down to, I found happiness, now you go out and do it. Bye. That kind of thing. But for these films, it didn't bother me that much.
I guess what bothers me is it doesn't really illustrate how to find love. Neon Genesis was about struggling to find love. I struggled with it. And I have a hard time relating to people. And Rebuild's job should have been to illustrate through the characters and the story, this is how I found love. This is what led to it. This is the methods that I got to meeting Miyoko, and from a meta-narrative perspective, I think it fails in hand waving, I found love because my wife flew at me in a parachute and hit me in the face, and and started sniffing me up, and it's just it doesn't really illustrate how he found love. And even from a meta perspective, I know so little of their relationship and whatnot, that, and I feel like it's just not communicating properly. It's saying love is the way that you become happy to me, but it's not showing me how to do it, when Eva was always about showing the struggle of love.
Speaking of struggle, personally, I wasn't bothered. I wasn't enraged by the fact that Shinji ended up with Mari. I think that the thing that I'm more concerned about is the way that the whole Ghibli village sequence, there's a lot of world building there, and there's a lot of our future there's some finality to our future if the conflict is not resolved, because they have those ceiling pillars that are preventing the corization from entering into the village, and it's also preventing the wanderers, the Phalos of Infinity, from also entering into their village. And that technology will eventually fail unless the greater problem is resolved. And the greater problem is resolved, but it's resolved by just saying, Thanos snap, the whole world is different now. Unless, of course, like Shinji is just getting his own new reality with Mari, because basically the only ones that would be in that new reality, the ones that are inside of the anti-universe, the imaginary space, were Shinji, Mari, Rei-2, Gendo, and Yui. Technically, Kaoru wasn't there.
I think Gendo and Yui just go into the abyss. They stay in the anti-universe. I don't think that they got to leave. It didn't seem like that to me. Because otherwise there was no point to kicking Shinji out then.
Right.
Know?
Yeah. But they don't resolve any of the elements of the, here's this village that we are meant to care about, and it's, fate, and then we resolve that problem, that conflict, but without actually resolving that conflict.
Yeah, resets are always not the best way to handle solving problems.
Shinji should have stayed in the fictional world of Village 3 and helped them rebuild. I really, really, really feel like that's like the ending that should have happened. So
she should have gotten the hero's welcome walking back to the village, and Toji and Kensuke would be there waiting for him and all that stuff. Yeah.
It kind of reminds me of the end of Die Buster, if like Nono and Lark had just basically recreated the universe without any of these things in it. Like, I feel like there should have been, like Shinji should have gone back to the village, and they should have, like, it should flash forward to, like, you can get rid of all the Evangelions, you have, like, this is kind of a weird tangent, but like Gundam Wing, they get rid of all the Gundams in Gundam Wing, Endless Waltz, and it's like those weapons that we had before that were a threat, we never saw them ever again. That's the resolution. And, we can cut forward to, Shinji and Mari are living together in the village, and they have aged, and they're building a new future, but instead they just Thanos snapped everything. If that's the implication.
I'm sure the village still exists.
It takes away from the name Rebuild as well to not tie that in, but does the village exist separately? We're confused about it. We're confused if it was wiped away or if it's like...
I think there were some shots of the village. There was at least one shot of the like Kensuke's house during that last bit. I think it was, my interpretation is just the village is there. Shinji and Mario are just right now not over there. Maybe they're on vacation in Ube. Who knows?
This goes into something else I was thinking about. Is this even a different world in that last scene?
Yeah. Is he just showing us another possibility? Yes. Remember, like, there's that live action sequence from End of Evangelion that was not used, where internally within the timeline of the film they showed us another version of reality. Whereas this is another version of reality, but it's at the end, and it does technically enter into live action.
Well, the live action thing, I think it's like a shout, again, Anno shouting out to the otaku to return to reality. I think that was the sort of the point.
Touch grass. Yeah.
Yeah.
But are we literally supposed to look at, Mari jumping out of the Eva into the water, and then the Eva ceasing to exist, and then we jump to, Ube, the train station? Are we supposed to literally see the through line there, or is it just, here's another reality?
How does the collar play into it? Because Shinji has the collar.
Yes, and that's another thing too.
Yes.
The DSS choker is there. Like, what does that even mean?
Well,
yeah,
it's sin, right? It's like representative of burdens and sin, and she's helping him carry it. That's the point, right?
I was watching it this afternoon, and I was wondering if the approach of thinking that that last scene is a different world is the intended consequence, or if we're supposed to be seeing this as, 15 years later and the infrastructure's improved and this is all the same world, just with the Evangelions completely erased, and it's not retroactive. You know what I mean? It's the same continuity that we've been seeing this whole time, just 15 years in the future.
That's an interesting thought. The DSS choker is just the really weird part of that whole thing.
Because it means he would have been wearing it for like 15 years or something.
Yeah, and to be
It's
fair,
like he's still holding on to it.
And to be fair, in Neon Genesis,
it's just a fashion
they were,
statement. Death collars.
To be fair, in
All the kids
Neon
are wearing
Genesis Evangelion, they were able to restore quite a impressive amount of technology and infrastructure in only 15 years' time.
Yes, that's true.
But the population is back to normal, right? So now they can do that, I suppose, right? So, yeah. Maybe it's the same world, or maybe it's not. I honestly, the way that it's cut is supposed to feel like a continuous scene, like a sequence between the beach stuff and the end, and then the DSS choker also implies that it is continuous, like that it is like not physically in time. It takes place like five minutes before the beach stuff starts. That's what it like, or 5 minutes after, I mean. So it's sort of weird, like the time dilation and whatnot within that. Maybe that has to do with the title, Thrice Upon a Time. I don't know. So who knows? Time travel. It's all the kids are doing it these days.
Somebody insisted that directors do not get better with age.
That sounds like Tarantino.
Part of that is because,
and it's true of
that
him,
sounds about
I
right. But there is
no, I'm just kidding. So.
There's two layers to that. If it's true that directors do not get better as they gain experience, there's nobody to oppose them.
I think the opposition thing is really valid. Something with Anno is that he's worked with like Akio Satsukawa on Love and Pop, that he wrote Love and Pop and such. And he's a very collaborative person, and then in this documentary the collaboration seems to be at an all-time low as far as like Anno and collaborating with others. And filmmaking, regardless of auteur theory, is still a collaborative work. It's still like important to get feedback and other people involved in the creation of something, because it does make things better. I mean, Tarantino himself said that all he did with Reservoir Dogs was surround himself with people who are better than him at what they do. And when you get to become too big, either your ego starts to inflate to the point where you don't accept feedback, kind of like when that one guy was like, hey Anno, I have like some drawings here I want to show you, and he's like, no, I'll think about it myself later, like that sort of thing. Or you know, people get too intimidated, like with Lucas, where they don't feel like they can talk to him and such because he is so legendary. I think that is a real reason for it. I don't think directors get worse with age. Kubrick is just an excellent example of somebody who I thought...
That's exactly what I thought of.
Yeah, Kubrick is like excellent, like all the way through his filmography, up until Eyes Wide Shut with his last one, which I also think is an exceptional movie. So it's kind of like he's just... Yeah, some of the stuff that he made was late in his career that's like the most iconic. The Shining in the 80s, for example. So, yeah. I don't know about that take, but yeah, I do think when you fail to become a collaborator, it can be more difficult to produce something of quality, I think.
Yeah, and the documentary kind of showed Anno as being somebody that kind of shut down a lot. He couldn't say what he wanted. He could only say, well, it's not that.
Yeah, he didn't know what he wanted. He only knew what he didn't want.
Right.
I'm curious to hear both of your guys' take on the editing of the movie specifically. Like, how do you feel like the cuts were and what shots were used? And like, I'm just interested from an edit, you know, because you both are editors. Like, what are you guys' perspective on the editing of the movie specifically?
Personally, I thought the cinematography, the editing, you know, the music, overall, I thought the film was just very well made. There wasn't any, aside from like, again, the objectification, you know, some of those angles, you know, lots of butts. That was a little bit distracting, but overall, I thought just the craft of the film overall was very, very good. There was a few things that I thought were distracting. One thing in particular that jumped out at me that it's not a cinematography or editing thing is the Asuka on the beach. Just, it looked too clean, almost like Flash, you know, animation, as opposed to like the film grain look that, you know, we know from other things.
I just went back and looked at the original Death and Rebirth, not True and not True 2, the original transfer, like that really banged up film transfer they did for the Blu-rays, and was like, man, this looks so much better than any of the Rebuild films, because it has that grit. It has that, like, the rebuilds are too clean.
Yeah.
They're too clean. I mean, all contemporary anime looks this way now, but it's just, it doesn't have the jitter. There's not that separation of the film, the celluloid and the background.
It definitely doesn't feel film-esque. Yeah, like
It's so static.
I miss there's a term I learned in school called factura, which means the texture on top of, and that's sort of like missing from non-analog mediums for the most part. But a lot of cameras these days, like the Arri Alexas, I think at least have like some sort of flicker that replicate that kind of feel a little bit. But yeah, I feel like with digital animation, it can be even more absent, which I'm surprised like Anno didn't actually do, like implement like more analog techniques to get the filmic look, because he was going for CinemaScope in these last 2 movies. And that seems to be like, yeah, if you're going to recreate CinemaScope, why don't you recreate cinema feeling too?
Even he used the vintage, wasn't the toy logo in 3.0? It's the super banged up like 35 version of the logo that they used on that film, which is kind of an odd choice because every other logo's super clean.
Yeah.
Chester, any thoughts about cinematography or editing?
Yeah, no, the editing is actually pretty interesting. Overall, the editing's good. Nothing was jarring. There were 2 editing points that I thought were interesting. One was in the Ghibli village. A lot of the exposition where Kensuke or Toji was talking, it was kind of reminiscent of vlogs, or like specifically Casey Neistat vlogs, where Casey would go to a new location and say a different sentence, and then you would have all those sentences edited together. It's strange that in a film it came up as well. But that's one thing. The other thing, there was a editing choice that I thought was interesting that sort of bugged me, but I understand why they went with the way they did in the final film. In the beginning of the film, Mari is singing this song, right? And it kind of just goes on in the audio track continuously for a few minutes. But this, in terms of the story, there's a point where there's an ellipsis cut. So ellipsis cuts is like a time jump. So on screen, maybe it's a minute, but at some point they jumped ahead in time, so it's actually conveying something that happened 5 minutes later. And the Mari singing is continuous. So the ellipsis cut happens when Midori complains about, these plug suits, they should really they should only force the Eva pilots to wear them. And then Maya's like, shut up and get to work. And then we cut to Midori on the laptop typing. Obviously, that's an ellipsis cut because she can't teleport from her place on the ladder to her sitting down on the computer. And yet, if you listen to the background audio, Mari's just continuously singing without a break. Her song is uninterrupted. So, that's sort of, it breaks the rules of reality there. But obviously, I think most people don't pick up on that, and there would have been more sort of awkwardness in terms of the editing feel if we did cut ahead to Mari's song later in the song. So, so those are a couple editing thoughts I had.
Brandon, did you have any more thoughts on it or no?
I mean, yeah, nothing really stood out to me. I agree with you about the some of the composition is a little much, but that's kind of something Anno's always done. There's some really bad composition and like novelty camera angles in Love and Pop that kind of betray how good the rest of that movie is. So Anno's done that kind of stuff before, but in terms of the editing itself, nothing really jumped out at me. I feel like that was kind of a leading question.
Sure. I mean, there's some things that I thought about, but I was really just reverse engineering since you both are like into editing and stuff. So, like I thought it was kind of bizarre that he would cut to close-ups of like in the opening sequence with Ritsuko, it cuts to a close-up of her shoes and it says like anti-stick, and I'm like, why do I need to know this? Like that was kind of
felt
weird.
like that was a reference to 2001.
Really? It's like there were clearly written words, so my eyes like went there. And
she's wearing grip shoes on the ship in 2001
Oh,
because
really?
there's a lot of Kubrick in 2001 references in Evangelion, so
especially
I kind of
in 3.0,
maybe
right? Like where it's like the tray of food.
Well, like even just Zele itself is just an overt and lots of shots in the end of Evangelion look like they kind of were inspired by 2001. So maybe I'm making connections where there aren't any, but that was the first thing my head went to, was that, oh, he's doing the grip shoes.
That's fair.
And he wants us to know.
I was just going to say that there's a lot of inserts in general, like a lot of insert shots, and they don't necessarily like mean anything. Usually you'd use like an insert or a close-up for a very particular like punctuation of like really intimate angle, for example. Like you'd go close-up on Asuka if the scene called for it emotionally, necessarily. And I don't know that if he did that 100% of the time in the editing.
I think he just goes for stylistic stuff there.
Yeah, and one thing that bothered me about the cinematography was like, there's a principle called affinity and contrast. Bruce Block talks about it. I'm kind of like a mentor. Like, Bruce Block was one of my professors that I really, really liked from USC. And he says the more you do something, the less effective it will become in the overall film. So if I have canted camera angles and I use that for a large part of the film, it takes away from the impact, because there's several scenes that had it. So by the time that I see it like in the movie, if I need it for a particular moment, it's not going to feel that impact. And so one thing that bothered me consistently, and is sort of a criticism I have of Anno's style in general, is that he kind of overuses special camera angles when they're not necessary for the emotion of it, that when they do become necessary, they don't have as much, like, it doesn't jump out at you as heavily. And the fact he didn't properly storyboard this movie and kind of like printed out several camera angles and was circling like, this is a cool angle, this is a cool angle here. Like, I think the quality of filmmaking is subpar compared to his live action films, as well as his like other previous animated works. He's thinking, like with Kare Kano, part of what I liked about it was like those interesting avant-garde, like super flat things that you could do with it, where she like rose up like a rocket or whatever, and it was very like surreal and kind of very specific to animation. And here there's a lot of like voyeuristic surveillance camera angles, where it's like the camera's in the corner of the room or something like that, and he does that like a billion times in the movie. And so it's sort of that's a very particular feeling, and he's kind of like lessening the impact of that along with several other different compositions. I don't think there was a single iconic composition in this film that I took away from compared to EOE, which was like tons of them, or Kare Kano, which had several compositions that I can think of, or even the previous Rebuild films. Like, I feel like 3.0 actually looked better from the camera angles and the composition perspective. More interesting use of flat space, more interesting kind of like use of top-down cameras and all that. And I don't know, I just felt like the style was a little strange this go around compared to the other Rebuild films. Maybe you don't feel that way, that's okay, but yeah.
I agree with you. The process that Anno used in this, I think, was not to his benefit.
Mm-hmm.
In terms of like overuse, I did feel like the scene transitions were there's a lot of abrupt scene transitions, particularly with Shinji waking up, that I thought were not necessarily bad or distracting, but they were noticeable. Let's push into some like basically some conclusions. So being as how we waited 8 years, for this final ending, and even more so, 15 or so years since we saw these films start. I know, Michael and Chester, you entered into fandom after the Rebuild film started, but how, do we feel like the 8-year wait was worth the wait, and did the movie live up to the hype?
It couldn't possibly live up to the hype. I think a lot of people really, really love this movie. I do think we're looking at Phantom Menace syndrome, to be honest. I think that it's a relatively poorly made film on a lot of levels. And like from character writing, plot, theme, like I'm just not impressed with it. And I think that a lot of people will grow kind of like disenchanted over time. I think the rebuilds were started because of financial reasons and not for artistic reasons. And I really don't feel like I'm glad that they exist for, the fandom to continue, for like people to still speculate about the next product. I'm glad that this ending is an overtly happy ending that communicated virtually, similar messages to what Ava's always done, but in a way that is like more overt, so that people who felt isolated by End of Evangelion or Neon Genesis Evangelion's ending did get something that felt happy to them. I've always interpreted EOE as a glass half full ending, much more so Neon Genesis' original ending. I think it was a waste of time. I regret how much emotional investment I placed into these movies, just because I was like so excited and speculating and making videos about it. And I regret that now in retrospect. Like, I think that maybe that's the lesson I learned, and maybe that's part of what Anna wants me to take away, is like, don't give a shit about Ava. What are you doing? Go live your life or whatever. And I feel like yeah, it's a little hypocritical considering what he said after the movie, if that is the case. I'm not thrilled by the rebuilds, and I kind of I'm okay with them existing, but like, I'm just gonna, it's not for me, and it's for other fans and other people.
I want to jump in there and say I did meet and talk with Takeshi Honda, who is one of the animation directors on Ava, back in 2004, and this would have been either around or just before the time that Anno is said to have rewatched NGE and said something effectively like, "Yeah, that was pretty good. I think I've got, I think I want to do something again with that again." Takeshi Honda said that even after completing the series and completing End of Evangelion, before like the turn of the millennium, Anno wanted to make a sequel series to Evangelion. So I don't think that it was a purely financial thing. It's that Anno keeps remaking Evangelion, and I
guess that's kind of sad then, because I always thought of his live action films as kind of like his true artistic calling and whatnot. Because I love his live action movies, so it's kind of, I always thought of this as weird, like, break in between that. I don't know. But maybe you're right. Maybe it's not for financial reasons. I'm being judgy. I'm sorry, Anno. If you're listening to this, I apologize. Go on. So.
He's just yelling "too bad" into his computer screen.
Yeah.
Too bad.
So I don't think that it was purely financial. I won't go so far as to say that I think that Anno has wasted the last 15 years of his life by giving so much of his time and energy to these films. He did do Shin Godzilla, he did do Animator Expo, he voice acted in Wind Rises, a number of other things.
Mm-hmm.
I am glad that these films exist for what they have done for the franchise as a whole. That said, like, I was really on the hype train and it didn't live up to it. I think I like it a little bit more, each time I watch it. I think I'm a little bit more sympathetic to it. I've been digging into the lore more. I think there's closure now, and I'm looking forward to seeing what Anno is going to do next, before he retires.
I just want to clarify one thing. I didn't mean to say that Anno wasted his time. I meant I wasted my time being invested in these movies. So, but
there is a question there as well. But
yeah.
I do want to kick it back to Chester and then Brendan. How do you feel about the journey overall in following these films?
I mean, as I talked about at the top of the podcast, I really didn't wait for the film, and so I had no expectations for the film, right? With considering how I preferred NGE to the rebuilds thus far, up until Q, I really went in to 3.0 plus 1.0. Someone got me a ticket to watch it on the opening day, so I went with them to watch it. But if it wasn't because I was concerned about spoilers or anything, I wouldn't have much trouble with the idea of watching it 2 or 3 or 4 weeks later. So I kind of went in with very low or normal expectations and was overwhelmed by this visual spectacle. And I wasn't focused on the lore just because I already given up on understanding the lore at the cinema without subtitles. So I enjoyed the film a lot, and I think it's my favorite rebuild film. 1 and 2, I feel like if I wanted to rewatch those parts, I would just watch NGE. And So,
Would you say that you are satisfied with the conclusion that we got?
I'm satisfied. Yeah, I like this ending. I guess I historically, so my top anime, I've refused to give it to NGE, even though I love NGE, and I always put it as my top anime, Code Geass and NGE number two, because I think I'm a little bit of I guess an optimist, I would say, and NGE's ending is just a little bit too downer, or NGE's general mood is a little bit too much of a downer for me, that I refuse to crown it as my number one. But and as an optimist, or whatever you want to call it, I feel like this final ending is much more suited for me as an Evangelion fan, if that makes any sense. So I'm glad that like it provides a positive ending, or more upbeat ending to the sort of more depressive ending that I found in End of Evangelion.
And Brendan.
I think that the Rebuild films act as a good counterpoint to, or not counterpoint, but just a counter to NGE. I think that I had a much, sort of like Chester, I didn't really take these films that seriously, especially in the beginning. And so, but by the time the first film came out, I was really kind of out of the fandom in general. And then it was sort of this on the periphery, like, oh, that's interesting, let's check this out. So I didn't have quite the investment that I think you guys might have had in these movies. So I might have had lower expectations in general. I really, I wasn't waiting with bated breath for 8 years for this movie to come out. I kind of thought that it was never actually going to happen at that point. But in terms of it, the film itself, thing as I've said before, I think it's an appropriate ending to this series of films. I like that it was an interesting experiment to try to do these films and to end it this way, and the deviations that happened in the third film I think are really interesting. It's not entirely successful. It's certainly no NGE, but I think overall, as an audience member, I'm satisfied with how everything ended up and where everything went. I like this movie quite a bit, honestly.
And for my part, it was a tall order to really resolve everything, and I was pessimistic about it. I thought that there was going to be too much for them to do, and there's a lot that they didn't do that I would have liked them to do. So I'm not gonna say no, because I'm still digesting it and I want to dig more into like the deep lore. And as far as like, am I satisfied in what they explored with that? But I'm gonna say not really. I do still feel very underwhelmed by the ending. It's kind of a non-answer, but I'm glad that it's over, because I want to see what Anno is going to do, with his remaining years. I'm very much looking forward to Shin Ultraman and Shin Kamen Rider, and I would not mind a Shin Gamera. That's a franchise that I think has been dormant for entirely too long.
I'm looking forward to his attempt to reboot Nausicaa. I think that'll be interesting.
Yes, I would like to see that as well.
Yeah.
But some of the other questions people had were, one was is whether or not this last movie is the last installment in the Evangelion franchise. No, Kara has specifically said that they intend to keep Evangelion as a part of its output, both in terms of like culture as well as actual works. Anno has said that he's good as far as like Evangelion and anime is concerned right now, but he has made some comments that he would like to do more Evangelion eventually, and that he specifically wanted to shed some light on the time skip. So we may see a Rebuild 2.5.
I guess it's not bye all of Evangelion.
But being as how we don't know what the future installments of Evangelion might be like, what would we like to see in a future Evangelion installment, and who would you like to see work on it?
I think Kazuya Tsutamaki should lead it no matter what. And personally, if I was selfish, completely selfish, I want his version of 3.0 plus 1.0, because
Wow.
he's responsible for Until You Come to Me, which I really liked the tone of, and I think that was a beautifully constructed short film in a lot of ways. And like, I would like to see an alternate, like, different director take a shot at it, because he had a script ready to go, and I'm really interested in what that script was. Anno turned him down and said, no, you can't make the final one, only I can do that. And I would just be really, 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 really interested in an alternate take on the finale from someone else who is an Eva fan, but not necessarily the creator. That's just me. That's a totally selfish desire. Just because I'm really interested in stuff like that from a filmmaking perspective. That would be historical and unprecedented. But you get what I mean.
I agree that Tsurumaki should make it, but I don't think that anything should be made. I think we should be done with Evangelion for like 50 years or something.
That's a good answer. That's my answer too, in reality.
I mean, I love Tsurumaki's work. I just want him to do something different. I want them all to do something different. And talking about Anno, frankly, I want to see Anno go back to Love and Pop and Shikijutsu and not mess around with any of these existing properties of otaku stuff. I want to see him do his art films again like he was doing before.
Oh, totally. Agreed. Yeah.
Chester, is there anything you might like to see from Evangelion as a franchise in the future?
No, I think it's good that Anno's taking a break. Very excited for Shin Ultraman and Shin Kamen Rider, like Aaron, you are. As for Eva, I mean, what isn't Anno's stated goal to bring back Eva into the culture so that other people can remix it like the Gundam franchise?
Correct.
So I thought that's interesting, although I felt like with the release of 3.0+1.0, Anno really set the bar so high that, well, for you guys maybe not so much, but like in Japan it's very well received actually. But to a certain for a certain population, it might be like that Anno has set the bar so high that any creator would come in would be intimidated by the legacy left by Evangelion and not want to be the first one to tip their toes in the water of this such a legendary franchise. But that's interesting. But I'm much more excited on what Anno is doing next, basically, is the short answer, much more so than the future of the specific future of Evangelion, the franchise.
I would like to see more Evangelion potentially, and I would like to see Tsurumaki take a stab at it. There's like three things that, like, if it was going to be anything, I would like to see. One would be more things in the vein of the Animator Expo shorts. I would like to see, just some like vignettes. Like, there's potential to tell a small story about what happened to the Nevada branch, or Asuka's date, that she left at the Ferris wheel. I would also like to see I would not mind seeing a Evangelion 2.5 where they explore the time skip. I feel like there's a lot of stuff there they could touch on that could help enhance what happens in 3.0 and 3.0+1.0. Or just something completely out of left field. I would not mind seeing a NGE prequel that explores the first ancestral race. And I understand like that those things could, for like the NGE oriented stuff, could not necessarily taint, but can potentially damage the work by adding to it afterwards. Like, there's like that metaphor about painting, and that there's a specific number of brushstrokes to finish a work, and if you keep putting brushstrokes on the work, you'll ruin it. But
yeah, I'm worried about Prometheus.
Oh my god, I am an Aliens fan, so don't even get me started on Prometheus.
So sometimes not knowing is much better than knowing the official explanation.
What will you all be doing now that Evangelion has ended?
I'll go back to watching Criterion films.
Good answer.
I don't know that I've really been going back in time with my media consumption, and so I've been working my way through Criterion collection. And now that Evangelion's over, I wasn't doing much before either.
I will ask you to consider reading the manga sometime.
I will. I promise you, I will consider to read the manga sometime. That's what I'll do on now that it's over. It's not. I actually know, Aaron. I won't read the manga because if I don't read the manga, then Evangelion's never really over for me.
A lot of my life has been centered around work because I am just like fresh out of school and all that. I'm working on a comic book, which is pretty cool. I've been really happy about that so far. I got hired to write a visual novel. I wrote a horror game, like a script for a horror game that's currently in production, and I'm working on financing a feature film, which I think will be really, really cool. I want to make like a feature for 20K. We'll see if I can do it. It'll be shoestring AF, but I've made like 16 short films, so I feel prepared with the expectations of what to expect with something that low budget. So I'm excited about that. I want to do that next year. And as far as anime goes, I'm going to watch whatever people recommend, I suppose, like in big swaths, but I don't know if I'm going to be watching much of it compared to like Criterion movies. I'll also be doing that, so I'm working on just like backlog of older films as well. So yeah.
So Brendan and Michael, I guess as far as Evangelion is concerned, you've basically got closure on that. But Chester, is this something you're going to continue to live with and analyze in your endeavors?
Yeah, no, I think there's a lot of interesting cuts and shots in 3.0+1.0 that I haven't been able to dissect just yet. And when I was watching it in the cinema, I was just like, I felt it was like a treasure trove of cinematic ideas. If I had time, I would go back to AnnoCinema and kind of go back to my roots and dissect that stuff. But I'm kind of busy right now with the film projects that I'm working on, kind of shooting around Japan now that I'm here, making the most use of that opportunity. So I don't know when I'll be able to get around to that. But yeah, I think I'll have to rewatch this film a couple more times with the subs, maybe even with the Japanese subs. That'd be interesting. Other than that, looking forward to Anno's Shin Ultraman coming soon, and then Shin Kamen Rider. But,
yeah, definitely we'll be watching those as well.
And for my own part, I don't feel like I will ever be done with this franchise. It's just such an integral part of my life that I know that there are more videos, more podcasts, more essays that I want to make, but I do feel very much like I need a break from Evangelion for a little bit, I think. Just because it's such an inflection point with this film's release that it's a lot to take in.
Yeah, you don't want to get burned out. I think you've earned it, Aaron.
Yeah, I think I might want to take a break for a little bit and just maybe watch something else. Maybe revisit Karakano or Die Buster, maybe. Rewatch some of those other classic Gainax shows.
Mm-hmm.
Thanks once again to Brendan of Viva Otaku, Mikel of GoatJesus, and Chester of AnnoCinema for joining me for this episode. Links to their various social media can be found in the description down below. If you enjoyed this show, be sure to subscribe for future episodes. Please leave us a comment or a like. It helps us a ton and lets us know how we're doing. More information, episodes, and show notes are available at avamonkey.com/podcast and at anchor.fm/avamonkey. Thanks for listening. We'll see you again soon.